Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Stories are everything. Without stories, I don't think we'd be here. It was our ancestors' ability to tell the story of how Uncle Frank was killed by a saber-toothed tiger that is why we're here today. Stories are an evolutionary necessity. My favourite kinds of stories are science fiction stories. Science fiction to me is about ideas, about concepts, about predictions, about possibility. The short story is a crystallised form of this. So this podcast is dedicated to looking at short science fiction stories. What I hope to do over the coming episodes is look at some new authors, classic stories. A lot of the stories are going to reflect my own tastes. This is to say that I probably won't be reviewing monster stories, zombie stories. I won't be reviewing spin-offs such as Doctor Who, Star Trek, Star Wars. This is not to say that there aren't great short stories in this field. It's just not something that I'm taken with. So what qualifies me to talk about science fiction short stories? Nothing. I don't claim to be an expert in the field. I'm just a fan. My background is in journalism and writing. So before I begin putting together this show, I want to hear from the listeners. I want to know, what do you think I should be reading? Who are the science fiction authors who have written great short stories? I'm on Twitter at JL Cronshaw, which is Juliet Lima, CRONSHAW. Hopefully I'll present the shows in such a way where you can listen to the podcast, read the story, and the podcast won't spoil the story. Until the podcast begins, follow me on Twitter and I'll keep you up to date with the latest. Until next time, cheerio. Hello, welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Robbie by Isaac Asimov. The story was written in 1939 and originally published in Strange Science Stories in 1940. The version I read was in I, Robot, a collection of stories published in 1950. Robbie tells a story of a 8-year-old girl called Gloria who is best friends with her nursemaid robot, Robbie. It's a robot that can't talk, but it plays games and looks after the child. The first part of the story talks about how much Gloria enjoys spending time with the robot. They play hide and seek. Gloria tells the robot stories. Indeed, the robot loves fairy stories, it seems, his favourite being Cinderella. This leads to tension within the family as the mother is against the robot. She fears the technology, she fears the robot. Now, if this story was released today, it would probably come under a lot of criticism. The main reason being is that the gender roles set up within this storyline would be seen today as quite sexist. The male, the father, he's represented as being wise, rational. The mother, the female character who is against technology, is presented as irrational, hysterical. And in a way, we kind of have to forgive this. It was written in the 1930s. The times were different. And I don't think it'd be fair to dismiss a story based on this, because the main themes of this story, as I say, are getting past the fear of technology, the bond that people can have with technology that can be more than just that of utility, and the idea that within technology there is hope. There is a hope for a better future, that we can improve things. There's a great line in the story where the father talks about how, you know, a robot maid is better than a human maid because humans, you know, they're fallible, they can make mistakes. Robots have, and this is where it gets introduced as a concept, the first law of robotics, which is buried so deep into their programming that a robot couldn't possibly hurt a human. And I think what Asimov does through his representation of Robbie the robot as this character who is playful, who enjoys stories, who enjoys not just stories but fairy stories, he kind of raises questions about what it is to be human. The relationship between the daughter and the robot is, you know, it's a really touching one. And it does raise these questions about, you know, whether we can have relationships with objects, at what point an object becomes something else, at what point it becomes, I don't know whether human's the right word, but some kind of sentient being that we can take seriously as, I suppose, having its own agency or being something that is legitimate to bond with. So yeah, it's part of a great collection of stories. The iRobot, I mean, it's a classic in science fiction. I would urge everyone to go out of the way to read it. Don't worry, if you've not read it before, it is nothing like the Will Smith film of the same name, which was terrible. Let me know what you think of the story. I'm on Twitter at JL Cronshaw. That's Juliet Lima, CRONSHAW. I'm also on Facebook. You can friend me on there. It's Jon Cronshaw, John without an H. I'm also on Goodreads again, Jon Cronshaw. You can find me on there. In future shows, I'd like to get people on here to talk to about different short stories. So if you've got any recommendations, or if you want to join in on the show and you've got your own recording equipment at your end, maybe we can figure something out. That'd be great. So just get in touch, and I'll speak to you again soon. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Bread and Bombs by M. Rickert. The story first appeared in Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine in April 2003. The version I read was in Wastelands, the anthology from 2008, edited by John Joseph Adams. If you've not read that anthology before, it's highly recommended. It's a great collection. This story is clearly an allegory on the war on terror. It's set in the near future in a war-torn America. There's a lot of intolerance against foreigners. It seems that things that used to happen in the past, like mail order things and all that, have disappeared. One of the characters talks nostalgically about aeroplanes and how people used to actually use them to go and see their families when they were far away. The theme of lost innocence runs throughout this, and it's done really well. There's one point where there's a father having a conversation with his child, and he talks to them about, that they don't understand the world that they live in is different. They talk about snow. What do you think of snow? And the child says, well, when I think of snow, I think of death. There's those little moments that kind of really capture your imagination. It's like, why is the snow so dangerous? What is it? There's the issue of a family as well that have moved nearby that are refugees, that are treated with suspicion. Their clothes are different, their behaviour is different. They call a town hall meeting to discuss what should be done with these refugees. It's all leading up to this climax at the end of the story where the children, and it's told from the children's perspective, where the children are going to take matters into their own hands. They're going to deliver justice, and there's a nice ending to this, which I won't give away. So yeah, highly recommended story. Really moving, really good writing. And as I say, it's part of a really good anthology, so it's definitely worth checking out. Have you read this story? What do you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. That's JLCRONSHAW. I'm also on Goodreads. That's Jon Cronshaw on Goodreads. That's John without an H. I'm also on Facebook, so you can friend me on there and we can have a conversation about all these short stories. You can share your recommendations. I'm also going to be posting these podcasts onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. So thanks for listening, and until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. For today's episode, I'm going to be reviewing The Miracle Workers by Jack Vance. The story was originally published in Astounding magazine in July 1958 and tells the story of a group of warring keeps, basically opposing groups set up as feudal societies. Like some of Jack Vance's other work, this is an interesting take on the distant future where society is essentially degenerated into a medieval state, and things that are scientific, things that are based on technology are seen as being magical. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who said something along the lines of, when technology is so advanced it can seem like magic. And I think that's a theme that kind of runs through this. It reminds me a bit of Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, that series, Shadow of the Torturer, where the society in that is very much built around myth and fantasy, but it's all scientific, it's all real, it's all based in technology and grounded. So in this we have basically scientists, people who use the scientific method, and these people are called sorcerers. So that kind of gives you an idea of what this is about. Now, I don't want to give too much away, as ever, don't want to give spoilers on this. Along with that, there's also telepaths. people they call the Jinx Men, and these have the ability to control thoughts and things like that. So really kind of some interesting ideas going through this. Of the Jack Vance stories that I've read, this is one of the weaker ones, I'd say. It's still a good read. There's something about the structure that doesn't quite work for me. I want to hear from listeners about how I'm doing these shows, because at the moment I'm trying not to include any spoilers about the plot or the storyline. I don't know whether this is inhibiting the discussions about these stories. I want to hear from you on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also friend me on Facebook. It's Jon Cronshaw without an H, JONCRONSHAW. I'm on Facebook. You can be my friend there. I'm also on Goodreads, so you can follow me on that. I'm posting all these shows to my new website, which is joncronshaw.com. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing 3 Cups of Grief by Starlight by Aliette de Bodard. The story was first published in January 2015 in Clarkesworld magazine. It's available for free on their website in text and as a podcast, so that's great. The story revolves around the death of a professor called Doi Oyan, who's a top researcher into the supply and distribution of food between dozens of planets. The story is told from 3 perspectives. There's her son, her research assistant, and a ship's AI. And each section deals with loss, deals with mourning, deals with death, and examines these different responses to the same person's death. What I liked about this story was each section was introduced by a description of a blend of tea. Each of these descriptions represented the mood, the feeling of each section, which I thought was really done well. Full disclosure, I read this story drinking a cup of Yorkshire tea. I have it quite strong with milk, no sugar. The first section is told from a perspective of the child of the professor, and it seems that one of the traditions within this universe is that if your mother dies, then you receive her memories in your own implants. Now, because the professor was such an important researcher, there was a political move to block this transfer. So the child essentially has to deal with this double loss, the loss of a mother and also the loss of this tradition of being able to share in those memories. The second section is from a fellow researcher's perspective, and it's this researcher who's going to be inheriting the memory transfers. And so it's about dealing with the consequences of that transfer. And the final section is from the perspective of a ship's AI, and the ship was obviously quite close to the professor. And so it's got this ship, this artificial intelligence, essentially mourning the loss of a friend, which raises lots of questions about friendship, about what it means to be human, about the legitimacy of artificial emotions. As well as being about death, there's the flip side. The story is also about life, and it's about how life carries on after death, how life continues, although you might think that somebody is a vital part of life, that somebody's so important that to lose them would be catastrophic. Actually, life goes on. People aren't that vital. Individuals aren't that vital. Now, the writing of this story is fantastic, really poetic, really rhythmic, and you get the sense of the feeling of the mannerisms of the world just from the way it's written, which is exceptional. Have you read this story? What did you think? I'm on Twitter, it's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook, it's Jon Cronshaw, that's John without an H. I'm on Goodreads, you can follow me on there. I'm also posting these up onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Gurn's Back Continuum by William Gibson. The story first appeared in Universe 11 in 1981 and was reprinted in the seminal Mirror Shades anthology from 1986, edited by Bruce Sterling. Gurn's Back Continuum tells the story of an arts photographer who is employed to take photos of American architecture The architecture in question is a very specific kind of architecture that is basically retro-futuristic. It's old architecture that hints at the future, the kind of future presented in pulp novels, pulp comics, that kind of thing from the 1930s. And as the photographer is going on his journey through America, taking photographs of these buildings, the imagery starts to seep into his imagination. And there's some really cool ideas going through this, but one that I particularly like is this idea that Gibson calls semiotic ghosts. And he basically frames it as this idea that our perception and context frames our imagination. So when we do things like hallucinate, when we imagine, when we believe we're seeing things that we aren't actually seeing, when we're thinking about things, they are influenced by our perception that's around us, by our context. He sees a friend who tells him about this girl who is assaulted by what is essentially a robotic floating bear with antennae and a flying saucer with glowing red eyes. And he said in medieval times this girl would have been a witch who saw devils and demons, and now she sees UFOs, now she sees aliens, and it's because of this cultural context. It hints at the way myths kind of evolve through this cultural context, through stories, through our perception of the future, and how it affects things like dream logic. In a way, I think this is a work about the genre of science fiction. Gernsback was a publisher of pulp stories, of pulp magazines in the early 20th century. And I think what Gibson's doing is framing his perception of the current state of the genre and contrasting it with what the genre is perceived as being or what it used to be. So he picks off these different images of spaceships, of cars with fins and blonde people dressed in white, and it's contrasted with this grittiness. His main character is a drug taker, taking the lowest, cheapest drug. He's taking speed. He's not a cocaine person. He's taking speed, and he's going across America in a hired car. It's cheap, it's gritty, it's grubby. And if you've read something like Neuromancer, this is a theme that is kind of running through this work, this cyberpunk thing. It's a really interesting story. I really enjoyed it. William Gibson's writing is always really evocative of images. Have you read it? What did you think? Get in touch. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm on Facebook. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. You can also follow me on Goodreads, and I'm posting these episodes up on my website, which is joncronshaw.com. So get in touch. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think of the show. It'd be great to hear from the listeners. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Tideline by Elizabeth Bear. The story first appeared in Asimov magazine in March 2007. I read this in an anthology called We Robots, which was from 2010, edited by Alan Castor. The story won the 2008 Hugo Award for the Best Short Story, and it is very good. The premise for this story is a robot kind of war machine, maybe looks a bit like a crab, called Chalcedony, is stranded on a beach. Throughout the story, Chalcedony is depicted as being female. The female pronoun is used throughout. The setting is post-apocalyptic. It seems that there's been a big war that's gone on. The setting isn't made clear as to where it is or when it is, but it seems to be some kind of near future, maybe in North America. From the premise that I've just outlined, you could call this story Battle Robots of the Apocalypse or something like that, but that wouldn't capture what this story is about. This is subtly told, really interesting story about a stranded robot who's realised that they've got no way of recharging their power, and it's told in this really sparse way over many years. The robot befriends a young orphan boy called Belvedere, and their relationship is one of nurturing friendship. She tells him stories, she cooks him food. All these things that this robot is doing are detrimental to its own survival, to its own existence, to conserving its own power cells. Now, along with this, there's also an element of the robot's desire to memorialise and mourn for her lost comrades in the war. So using things like shells and pieces from the beach, this crippled robot makes jewellery. And what's interesting is that there's this idea that, you've got this nurturing robot, you've got this idea that this robot has an aesthetic taste, has preferences to what something should look like. And this jewellery is very important at the end of the story. What I like about this is this is a very different kind of robot story than some of the more traditional ones that you get, like the Asimovs or the Dick stories about robots and androids, which seem to have this kind of master-servant dialectic going on. This one is about a robot that is essentially made for war, who, when in a position of knowing that they're going to die, knowing that they're going to run out of life, they're giving, all the while giving. And even at the last moment of the story, when the power cells die, there's a really kind of touching moment. Obviously, don't want to give that away, but it's a really great story. I really enjoyed this. Elizabeth Bear's done some really interesting stuff over the years, but I think this probably ranks as one of my favourites by her. So if you've not read it before, check it out. Have you read it before? Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook. You can friend me there. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. You can visit my website. It's joncronshaw.com. You can also subscribe to this show on iTunes. Follow me on Audio Boom. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I am going to review The Regular by Ken Liu. The story was originally published in the Upgrade anthology in September 2014, edited by Neil Clark. Some of you might remember the Kickstarter campaign that went on with that. The story is basically a near-future science fiction noir. A private detective is on the hunt for a serial killer. The narrative is split between two different perspectives. The first is the private investigator called Ruth. She's a cybernetically enhanced former policewoman. She has things like enhanced joints and basically making her actions faster. She has better reflexes than the average person. But key to a character, and I think Ken Liu does a really wonderful job with this, is a piece of equipment called the regulator. The regulator basically allows the user to balance their endorphin levels, adrenaline levels, basically keep their emotions in check. This is apparently so police officers can investigate crimes without having emotions blinkering in their investigation. Throughout the story, this really plays quite a cool role in the way the story is told, because Ruth is essentially quite a damaged character, and a lot of ideas about her dealing with her past, dealing with the current events, all kind of play into this. Another perspective is the killer. Now, the killer is an interesting serial killer. He goes after prostitutes who advertise themselves online through these websites where you can get a description of what the person's like, and it seems that all of the people he goes for can write well, and they're articulate about themselves, and they've got a certain attitude about them. And so it's a bit of a mystery as to why he's going after these particular sex workers. One of the key pieces of future technology in this that is really interesting is this idea of cybernetic eye implant that can be worn by people that can take photographs, and it stores it within the eye. So the data stored on the eye can't be extracted without extracting the entire eye. This can also be used to take things like films and sound and stuff. So it's really interesting. And this kind of plays into some of the storyline as well. Obviously, I don't want to give away what that is. The third thing that was quite cool about this was this the use of Wi-Fi technology to basically reconstruct a crime scene. So it was, I suppose it'd be a bit like if there was a Wi-Fi version of Kinect on the Xbox, and it could track your movements. It's basically a Wi-Fi equivalent of this, so it's used in someone's home to, they can do gestures and it'll pick up the things. But this is used in a really clever way to reconstruct a murder. So, yeah, again, I'm not going to spoil how that's done, but it's a really cool thing. So, I mean, the story itself, it's a very typical kind of thriller structure. Ken Liu's writing is great, really just clear, concise writing. And the story's got enough twists and turns to kind of keep you interested throughout. Now, this isn't the first thing I've read by Ken Liu. I read his fantasy novel called The Grace of Kings, which came out last year, And that's really great. Really good world building, excellent characters, just a lot of drama and a lot of kind of deep political intrigue, which is what I really like in stories. So the regular is nothing like the Grace Kings, but it's still highly recommended. And again, Grace Kings is also highly recommended. What's great is you can get this story for free, so you can read this online, and I will put the link within the show notes. In the meantime, I'm going to be looking for more suggestions for short stories to read. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook. You can find me. It's Jon Cronshaw, Jon without the H. So Jon Cronshaw, Cronshaw. You can also follow me on Goodreads, Jon Cronshaw again. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Doorway by Evelyn E. Smith. The story was originally published in Fantastic Universe in September 1955. The version I read was from Project Gutenberg. The story has lapsed copyright, so that means we can all read it for free, so that's wonderful. The Doorway is a story about parallel universes, alternative timelines, the idea that for every choice we make, there's an alternative universe where we've made that opposing choice. Our main character is basically a bit of a dick, a bit of a mean-spirited guy who his wife is quite aware that he wishes that he'd married another girl. The main driving force behind the story is a professor, and this is a thing that you get in a lot of early science fiction stories. I find it quite charming. I mean, it's a bit of a tired trope, but it's that, you have a professor, you have a scientist or someone like that explaining concepts to someone in the story in order to get the idea across. So it's like, oh, well, Bob, let me tell you something about these alternative timelines. So the husband's wife, she's convinced that the house is haunted, and the professor explains to her that actually these aren't ghosts, these aren't spirits, these are glimpses into these alternate planes, these alternate dimensions. And he just so happens to have worked out how to get access to these different planes. And it basically requires any doorway. So he goes, do you fancy trying an experiment, to the husband? And he goes, yeah, why not? And he goes through a doorway into his drawing room and doesn't think anything's happened. He looks around, realises that his lighter's missing, his ashtray's missing, and so is his paperweight. He turns and goes back into his sitting room, and there's a big change. I'm not going to spoil that for you. Read the story. It's fun. It's short. It's not going to blow your mind, but it's a nice little story. Have you read it? Get in touch. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm on Facebook. Friend me. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's JON CRONSHAW. I am also on Goodreads, so you can follow me on there. And I'm posting all of these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. And you can subscribe to this show on iTunes, leave a review, let me know what you think. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. For today's episode, I'm going to be reviewing More Than the Sum of His Parts by Joe Haldeman. The story first appeared in Playboy magazine in May 1985 and was reprinted by Lightspeed magazine in August 2010. The story is available on Lightspeed's website to read for free, so that's always good. More Than the Sum of Its Parts is a story about an engineer who gets injured in a serious industrial accident, and much of his body is replaced by cyborg parts. So he has an enhanced arm, he has his face rebuilt, he has his leg rebuilt, he even has his penis rebuilt. And from very early on in this story, we realise that the themes of identity and power are quite prevalent. From the early tests of his enhanced body, the main character falsifies the test results by not pushing his body to the limits that he knows that it can do.
But with the loss of his limbs, the loss of his face, the loss of his genitalia, his identity starts to become eroded, and has the desire to have his entire body transformed into a cyborg, with the eventual aim of connecting his brain to the world's knowledge. Now, a lot of this story is also about sex, and for that reason, there's a bit of a trigger warning that for people who maybe don't want to read about graphic sexual acts, then, this story is not for you. But yeah, this all goes into this idea of identity. It's kind of the problem in philosophy, the ship of Theseus. This idea that if you have a ship and replace every part of this ship, will it retain its identity through change? I mean, this is a question that we can keep coming back to, as a lot of science fiction stories do tackle this issue of sustaining oneself through change. Have you read this story? Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter, it's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook, you can friend me on there, it's JON Cronshaw. I'm also on Goodreads, you can follow me on Goodreads, and I'm also posting these shows onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. Feel free to let me know what you think, I'd love to hear from the listeners, so until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Deep Blood Kettle by Hugh Howey. The story first appeared in Lightspeed magazine in April 2013. The version I read was reprinted in Wastelands Volume 2, edited by John Joseph Adams. Deep Blood Kettle is a first contact story. It tells a tale of how what was originally assumed to be a meteorite heading to Earth is actually a rock that has been directed by an alien race. With the assured destruction that's on the way, the aliens make contact and give Earth an ultimatum: give us half your land and get rid of all your weapons and you can live. Now, being humans seems to be part of our DNA. We look at the rock and think of, how can we exploit this rock? So they analyse it for minerals and what it contains and what money that can be made from it. The story is told from a perspective of a farm boy who uses a lot of his experiences on the farm to make some quite insightful analyses of what's going on in the world. One of them that I really liked was he was talking about all these TV pundits talking about what's going to happen, and he used the analogy of it being like a rabbit when he's ploughing his field, a rabbit jumping from left to right, not knowing which way to go, and then ended up getting run over by the plough and turned into mush in the soil. He makes an obvious parallel between his ploughing through the earth, destroying everything living within its wake in order to plant new seeds, and then the parallel with the alien meteorite that's heading to Earth. It's a really well-told story. I like Hugh Howey's stuff, some of it at least. I really liked his Wool novel, the first one in the Silo series. I felt that series, the first book was really strong, the second book not quite so much, and then the third book was significantly weaker. But the first book, if you've not read Wool, check it out. It is really good. Have you read this story? What did you think? Get in touch. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. Friend me on there. You can also follow me on Goodreads, where I post reviews of books that I've read. I'm also posting all these episodes on my website, which is joncronshaw.com. And if you enjoy the show, please share the links. I post the links on Twitter. You can also leave a review on iTunes. That'd be great. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Man Who Sold the Moon by Cory Doctorow. This novella appeared in the 2014 anthology called Hieroglyph. It's a project led by Neil Stevenson and is edited by Ed Finn. The Man Who Sold the Moon tells a story of a man called Greg, who after a big life-changing event at the start of the story, goes to Burning Man. Like most of Doctorow's work, I find the characters in this a little bit one-dimensional, but his work isn't about the characters, and it's not even about the storylines. For me, this is about the ideas. I think Cory Doctorow wears his politics on his sleeve in a lot of his stories,
And a lot of what it does is a way of exploring those ideas through a narrative form. Without going into too many spoilers, the basic gist of this story revolves around a cool piece of tech, which is a 3D printer that works on its own. It collects dust, it collects sand, turns it into hexagonal tiles that connect to each other, so you can use it to build things. You can make a house out of these tiles that have essentially come from nothing, essentially come from the ground. So he goes into the desert, leaves this thing running, comes back a few months later, and he's got a house built. It's great. The story goes on and this technology is improved, and it's realised it could be used to basically build a moon colony. This is where the writing gets interesting, because Doctorow uses this to talk about the opposing, competing maybe forces of capitalism, economy, ethics and environmentalism, and then of innovation. How the interplay between these things can kind of stifle or resist or subvert the other. And this kind of plays out in quite cool ways in, the way this piece of equipment's funded and the kind of mistakes that are made along the way, the protests and the kind of attitudes towards the virgin surface of the moon. Do humans have the right to create things on the moon? Do we have the right to mess with this virgin surface? And so it's basically an interesting discussion about ethics and about our place in the universe. As I say, the characters, not great. The storyline, it's fun, but it's kind of not really important, in my view, to what this story is about. What I do like about this, and this is a point that I'll probably keep going back to on this podcast, is there's a lot of modern science fiction that is very pessimistic, and this one, it has a lot of hope. I mean, there's pessimism, there's some kind of obstacles along the way, but there's hope. There's hope for the future. There's hope that technology can bring improvements to all our lives, and I think that is a really kind of underrepresented idea within science fiction. So good work to Cory Doctorow on this. What do you think about this? Let me know on Twitter. I'm at JL Cronshaw. That's CRONSHAW. You can follow me on there. I'm also on Goodreads, so you can see the big novels that I'm reading. I'm also on Facebook. It's Jon Cronshaw, Jon, no H there. So just friend me on there and let me know what you think of the show. If you've got any suggestions for future episodes, please do get in touch. And I'm also looking to bring in other people on the show to talk about these books, because it's better to have a conversation and a dialogue with someone than just talking into a vacuum. So if you want to review a story with me, get in touch and we'll try and sort something out. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Slow Bullets by Alistair Reynolds. This novella came out in 2015 and was published by Tachyon. Slow Bullets starts at the end of a war. And like most stories about intergalactic wars, there's always a few people left over who are still in the action even after the ceasefires come along. This is a story about memory, about remembering things, about culture, about identity. One of the key things that I like about this story is that every soldier has an implant that records their memories. It's basically a recorder of their thoughts and ideas, but also contains things like pictures of their family, and it literally acts in replacement of one's own memories. So if you do bad things when you're a soldier, then somebody else can remove this memory thing and look at it and make sure that, you didn't do bad things, and if you did, then you'll get punished for it. These memory storage devices are nicknamed slow bullets because of the way that they enter into the body. They're shot in and then they work their way through into the body and kind of settle somewhere near the lungs, near the heart, in the chest. But of course, this technology, these slow bullets, can be used for, let's say, more nefarious means. They can be used for torture. They kind of literally worm their way through the body. Now, if you make it so they act like a bullet, they go through muscles, they eat through limbs. It's quite a horrible device, really. What Reynolds does in this book that I really like is he raises a lot of questions about cultural identity and where our cultural identity is. For him, it resides in our shared knowledge, in our shared literature. And there's something that happens within this story where
the literature, the religious text, the history of an entire system is about to be lost. What the crew do to get around this is quite amazing. I mean, obviously I don't want to spoil it, but it's really interesting. But what comes from this is different factions, different groups within the ship start bickering, start warring about the meaning of some of these memories, the dogma, a kind of, basically a religious war breaks out within this ship. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook. You can friend me on there. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. I'm also posting all these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. So let me know what you think. And until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Windows by Beth Goder. The story first appeared on 1st of March 2016 on the Escape Pod podcast and is part of the second annual Artemis Rising. Windows tells the story of an academic working on a distant planet. Her specialism is to study alien cultures. There seems to be a lot of ideas packed into this story, which I really like. Without giving too much away, there's a really unnerving way that someone communicates with her, which is basically by manipulating her alphabet soup. So she'll be eating her lunch and see the words kind of appear in front of her that are sometimes prophetic or giving her advice about things. There's also a piece of technology that she borrows from one of her fellow academics. It's essentially a holographic overlay for your face. Now, your eyes are your own eyes, but the face, your facial features, your hair, they can be slightly tweaked. It's almost like it's basically a holographic disguise. So this academic uses this to go and speak to her ex-fiancé. Although the ex-fiancé sees a kind of familiarity with this academic when she's disguised, she doesn't actually recognise her. And she has a conversation about why she left her fiancé, which is really interesting. It's that opportunity. If you had an ex and there was a bit of uncertainty or a bit of mystery as to why things went downhill, why the separation happened, then this technology allowed her to go and speak to her ex and get answers and get some kind of closure in an unguarded way, which I thought was a really interesting idea. Throughout this as well, I mean, the story is called Windows, and the window is used throughout as a bit of a motif that kind of keeps cropping up again and again, and that's done in really interesting ways. There's also the theme of history, rejuvenation, and restoration. So yeah, really interesting story. I won't give away the main kind of plot lines, but it's well worth listening to. I think it's off episode 523 of the Escape Pod podcast, so it's free, and that's always good. So give it a listen. Have you listened to the story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. I'm also posting these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. And I'm also on Goodreads, so you can follow me on there and see what books I'm reading, as well as these short stories. If you haven't already and you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to leave me a review on iTunes. That'll help spread the word on the show. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing That Only a Mother by Judith Merrill. The story first appeared in the June 1948 issue of Astounding and has been reprinted numerous times over the years. That Only a Mother is set in 1950s New York. It's written as a speculative work and plays on the fears of nuclear weapons that came following the Second World War. The story is focused on the idea of motherhood and child rearing and genetic mutations caused by radiation. In this story, it seems that in around 1946-47, there were a series of nuclear explosions in the US, which led to lots of babies being born with mutations. What I really like about this story is it's very different to a lot of stories from this period. And rather than being a story about science and about technology, it's actually a really emotionally driven story. It's a really powerful ending. The story's told in an interesting way in that it goes between a third-person narrative and letters and telegrams shared between the main character and her mother, and the main character and her husband. The husband, we're told, is a technician in Oak Ridge, and it's likely that he was exposed to a lot of radium during the mid-40s. When the main character has a child, she convinces herself that there's nothing wrong with the child, that there's no mutations. She is worried about mutations and genetic anomalies, but she convinces herself that there's nothing wrong with the child and that it's just when things start happening with its development that are a bit odd, it's just, oh, well, this is just a baby's way. We see certain things in the baby's development, like it can talk at the age of 7 months. Now, I've got a 3-year-old, and he can talk, but not to the extent that this baby could talk. It seems to be very articulate and very forward in terms of its mental development. The last few paragraphs of this story are heartbreaking. Yeah, really worth reading. What did you make of the story? Have you read it before? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook. It's Jon Cronshaw on Facebook. That's John without an H. I'm also on Goodreads. You can follow me on there. I'm posting all these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. You can also email me at joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. So until next time, cheerio.
Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I am going to be reviewing The Egg by Andy Weir. The story was published in August 2009 on Andy Weir's own website, which is galactanet.com. So you can go and view that story for free, so that's always good. Without giving too much away, the story is basically about a man who dies and has a conversation with, is it God, perhaps? Some kind of transcendental being, let's say. What I like about this story, it's a kind of simple, superficial dip into the philosophy of religion, into things like Hindu philosophy, the idea that we are all one with everything, that we are God, we are the world, everyone is connected. It has a lot of cool little ideas about time and space and the universe, the nature of the universe, what is the universe. And these are good little, as I say, kind of superficial jumping blocks into, I suppose, a deeper examination of these ideas. Is it science fiction? Well, I think it is because it does deal with what the universe is and what its purpose is. Some people might regard this as a fantasy novel. I mean, to me, these borders are useful for publishers more than anything else. For me, it's a work of speculative fiction, so it doesn't really bother me. What I would say is, if you enjoy this story, it touches on some cool ideas, but they're explored in better ways. I'd say the novel White Apples by Jonathan Carroll, who really goes into this idea and explores this idea of the universe and humanity and spirit and the purpose of life and death and time. And I think it's a really cool thing. So Andy Weir story, it's fun. Nice little introduction to these ideas, but it's not going to blow your mind. It's just a nice little discussion, nice little introduction. So let me know what you think of the story. Do you agree? Do you think it is mind-blowing? Do you think I'm missing the point? I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm on Facebook. You can friend me there. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. I'm also on Goodreads, so you can follow me on there as well. So until next time, cheerio.
Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing a piece of flash fiction from issue 2 of the Singularity magazine. The story is called Blinder, Beta 3.1 by Rich Larson. This is an augmented reality story in which the wearer of a special implant is able to edit and change their reality. The main character in this story is called Dorian, and he's testing a piece of beta software called Blinder. And what this software does is allows you to edit reality. If someone's annoying you, you can erase them. In the first line of the story, he encounters a drunk, and it's described how he swipes left, transforms this drunk into a grey blob in his vision. His ramblings are reduced to a kind of underwater whoop 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 sound, and his smell is blocked through the use of implants in the nose and throat. So it tracks Dorian, and he's on a commuter subway train, and all the people he's found boring or uninterested on his journey, he's erased. One girl catches his eye, and he tries to talk to her, but it seems that she's got another set of implants going on. Without spoiling the story, you have an interesting ending where this reality augmentation backfires. Something happens, and Dorian's left unable to do anything about it. Have you read this story? Tell me what you think. I'm on Twitter, it's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook, you can friend me on there. It's Jon Cronshaw, that's John without an H. I'm posting these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. And I've also got a Twitter account for the show, which is Short SF Review. So feel free to follow me on there and recommend some stories. So until next time, cheerio.
Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Claudius Rex by John P. Murphy. The story first appeared in Alembical 3, edited by Lawrence N. Schoen and Arthur Durrance, and released by Paper Golem. Claudius Rex tells a story of a private investigator who has had his licence revoked and discovers a body while attending what he thinks is going to be a job interview. Now, the main frame of this story is it's a locked room murder mystery, I suppose you'd call it, but it's set in the near future, and the main character has neural implants that augment his thoughts with artificial intelligence. Now, there's a theme in this that reminds me a little bit of Rainbow's End by Verne Vinge, where the AI is basically hacked, but it's not hacked by another person, it is hacked by another AI. And the AI in question is Jeeves 5.0. Now, this AI that has taken control is more advanced than anything held by the military, and just to give him a bit of a quirky bent, he's also a fan of detective fiction. He goes by the name of Claudius Rex. What I like about this is it takes a lot of the traditional tropes that we see time and time again in detective fiction, in science fiction, and it plays with them. You've got the kind of usual stock characters that are messed around with. You've got the bumbling heavies and the evil cartel. You've got the inept management, that kind of thing. But you've also got this AI, which is basically, I suppose it's a bit of a Sherlock Holmes and Watson kind of relationship, where the AI acts as a really good counterpart to the main character. The main character is all about being able to read people, being able to read bodies, being able to read expressions. You know, his experience with actual detective work is what makes him an interesting detective in this. The AI, as I said, is a big fan of detective fiction and uses his logic, his ability to hack into phone networks and access knowledge that make the pairing a really kind of complete package for a detective. Now, I really like this story because there's a lot of humour in it. There's a lot of playfulness running throughout, which is great. Have you read this story? What do you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook. You can friend me on there. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. I also post all these episodes up onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com, so you feel free to leave a comment there. You can also email me. It's joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. So if you've got any comments about the show or recommendations for further stories, or you'd like to guest on one of these shows, get in touch and we'll try and work something out. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to review a story called The Day It All Ended by Charlie Jane Anders. The story first appeared in the 2014 anthology Hieroglyph, edited by Ed Finn. Now this is the second time I've dipped into this anthology for this podcast. The first story was in episode 11 when I reviewed Cory Doctorow's The Man Who Sold the Moon. So that should give you an impression of how much I enjoy this collection of stories. Now, because of the way this story is structured, this is a spoilerific episode, so if you've not read the story and you want to, check it out in the Hieroglyph anthology. This story is about an executive who works for a consumer products company,
These products are essentially quite convoluted, quite expensive, they have built-in redundancy, and they're just bad for the world. Our protagonist has a crisis of confidence in the company that he works for, and in a kind of Freudian slip, he ends up driving on his commute to the offices of a non-profit tech company that he used to work for called Economic. While there, we get a background of the world. He has this piece of technology called a Robobop, which seems to be ubiquitous. And from what I can gather is something like a smartphone, a GPS, that kind of thing. It seems to have all these apps and gadgets attached to it. It seems to be able to interact with other pieces of electronic equipment around it. There's a lot going on in the background of this piece of equipment. And there's a lot going on in the background of this piece of tech that seems very few people understand. While he's at Economic, he looks at a board detailing all of the ecological disasters that are going on. It seems to be floods, droughts, superstorms, all these different things going on. The Gulf Stream seems to be damaged and stuttering. And the people who work at Economic believe that the end is nigh, that we've gone too far, that there's no going back now. So it cuts back to the president of the corporation's office, and Bruce is talking to the president, and the president laughs and says, "You're a bit late. I thought you'd have your crisis of confidence a few months ago." And he then shows Bruce that he was actually employed to be what he called the canary in the mine. And so this is why it's difficult to talk about this story without spoiling it, because the main thing that comes out is the fact that you're led down this path, that everything's going wrong. The story's called The Day It All Ended. You've had all this foreshadowing of environmental disaster. It's a fake out. It's a swerve. The reader's led in one direction, and then it goes in another. And it's this ending that's really interesting, because all of this convoluted technology, all of these adaptations that this company does, they actually have a dual purpose. And so Bruce is taken up to see the other executives, and is still unsure about what's going on until he is asked to press a button that will change everything, that will change the world. And so this company's products suddenly transform, and they turn into things like solar panels. The Robobops do things like monitor your carbon footprint. There are things on buildings that reduce carbon emissions, that turn CO2 and water into methane. Devices that are attached to cars essentially force drivers into sharing and carpooling if they're doing the same journey at a similar time. So this story is about change, about the big sweeping change that's needed in the world in order to make it a better place for future generations. There's a bit of satire running through this, because it's saying basically that consumers aren't going to be convinced to buy these objects unless they're complicated, unless they're useless, unless it's basically a status symbol to have these objects. And in the afterword as well, the author talks about the input on this. So for the hard science fiction fans out there, this story is, straight down the line. All the science is there, or at least believed to be possible in the not too distant future. But it's the expense that's the barrier. So yeah, have you read this story? Let me know what you think. I think it raises a lot of issues, a lot of debates, and I think it is excellent social commentary. I'm on Twitter, it's at JL Cronshaw. You can follow the show on Short SF Review. I'm on Facebook, you can friend me on there. It's Jon Cronshaw, that's John without an H. I'm also on Goodreads, so you can see what big books I'm reading. I'm posting these podcasts, as well as some of my own short fiction, onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. And you can subscribe to this show on iTunes. So if you haven't already, go and do that. And if you enjoy it, please leave a review. That'd be great. If you've got any suggestions for the show, if you've got any feedback, please email me. It's joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing a piece of flash fiction from issue 2 of the Singularity magazine. The story is called Blinder, Beta 3.1 by Rich Larson. This is an augmented reality story in which the wearer of a special implant is able to edit and change their reality. The main character in this story is called Dorian, and he's testing a piece of beta software called Blinder. And what this software does is allows you to edit reality. If someone's annoying you, you can erase them. In the first line of the story, he encounters a drunk, and it's described how he swipes left, transforms this drunk into a grey blob in his vision. His ramblings are reduced to a kind of underwater whoop, whoop, whoop sound, and his smell is blocked through the use of implants in the nose and throat. So it tracks Dorian, and he's on a commuter subway train, and all the people he's found boring or uninterested on his journey he's erased. One girl catches his eye, and he tries to talk to her, but it seems that she's got another set of implants going on. Without spoiling the story, you have an interesting ending where this reality augmentation backfires. Something happens, and Dorian's left unable to do anything about it. Have you read this story? Tell me what you think. I'm on Twitter, it's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook, you can friend me on there. It's Jon Cronshaw, that's John without an H. I'm posting these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. And I've also got a Twitter account for the show, which is Short SF Review. So feel free to follow me on there and recommend some stories. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Bliss by Leah Bobbitt. The story first appeared in On Spec in winter 2004 to 2005. The version I read was in Science Fiction Best of the Year 2006, edited by Rich Horton. Bliss is a story about addiction, and the main narrative is about a man called Sam, who is a computer engineer, and his older sister called Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth is addicted to a drug called Bliss, which in the story seems to be at epidemic proportions. The drug causes great happiness with the users, and as they take the drug, they sit in a wide-eyed daze, finding joy and wonder in everything. The story begins with Sam picking up his sister from her boyfriend, and the boyfriend is abusive, so she comes along and she's quite beaten up. She's coming down from drugs, and so he puts it upon himself to be her carer. But there's a bit of conflict there. There's a bit of resistance to this at the same time. Along with this, we get glimpses into the dystopian nature of this future. As part of Sam's job, he's required to take drug tests every single month, and those who are found to be addicted to drugs are carted off by the social services. What I like about this story is it revolves around a discussion of what is happiness, what is value, where can we find happiness, where can we find value, and what makes experience legitimate. And as the story progresses, we find out that the person who does Sam's regular blood tests is also a former researcher into drugs, it seems. And after taking a sample of Elizabeth's blood, he comes back a few days later with a tablet which he claims will alleviate the effects of bliss, get Elizabeth off the drug, and so Sam replaces these tablets with the new ones. Where this story takes a twist is when Elizabeth spikes Sam's drink, and so Sam takes this new drug. It's a drug that's made to balance out this bliss experience, and so it has a different effect to what bliss does. Now, I'm not going to spoil this because I think that this is the area of the story that's most important, but it is really good. It's really well done. Have you read it? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can follow the show at Short SF Review on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. I'm also on Goodreads, so you can follow me on there, see what books I'm reading. If you're enjoying these shows, please leave a review for me on iTunes. Let me know what you think. And if you've got any suggestions or feedback, please email me. It's joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Death Flowers of Never Forgotten Love by Jason Sanford. This story was published in the March 2016 edition of Apex magazine. It's quite a short story that revolves around the idea of death flowers, which are essentially AIs that alter and manipulate people's memories, emotions, feelings, and also changes the public record, things like photographs, things like information about a person after they've died, and this is to help with the mourning process. Indeed, it completely removes the mourning process. When someone dies, all of the bad memories of that person are erased, all of the pain that's felt when that person dies is erased, and so people are left with a fake, false impression of the person who's died's life. The central character in this story is a former death flower who has taken on the body of a human. So we're obviously in a world where minds can be uploaded, downloaded, where synthetic bodies are so realistic that those containing the minds of AIs are given a brand on their face. So this story is essentially about the tension between the dead person's family, the AI that had fallen in love with the person who died, and the back and forth between those and the death flowers. I'm not going to spoil how this story goes. It's well worth checking out. You can actually listen to this story for free on the Apex Magazine's podcast feed. So that's always good. Have you listened to this story? Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can email me at Jon Cronshaw, that's John without an H, Jon Cronshaw, author, @gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook, so you can friend me on there. Goodreads as well, I'm on there, so you can follow me on that. The show also has a dedicated Twitter feed, which is Short SF Review. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry. We're on TuneIn Radio. You can also follow the show on Audio Boom. So get in touch, let me know what you think of the show. Let me know if you've got any suggestions for stories. And if you've got a few moments, please leave a review for this show on iTunes. That would be great. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Cassandra by C.J. Cherryh. The story first appeared in a magazine of fantasy and science fiction in October 1978. I listened to an audio version of this on the Starship Sofa podcast, episode number 307. And if you haven't listened to Starship Sofa yet, I would suggest you do, because it's probably one of the best science fiction podcasts out there. It's certainly my favourite. Cassandra tells a story of a woman who lives in a strange world that seems to be burning around her. It's filled with ghosts. The walls are crumbling. As the story progresses, you find out that this woman is mad. She's been in and out of mental hospitals her entire life. And everywhere she looks, there's death, there's ghosts. Things change for the main character when she sees someone who is solid. And in a world where everyone is a ghost, everyone is transparent, this is quite overwhelming for her. She abandons a drink and chases the man down the street. And feeling sorry for the woman, the man takes her arm and leads her around the city. The man doesn't know the woman. He's new to the city. He's not aware of her reputation and thinks that her odd behaviour can be put down to an impending war, news of which is plastered all over the newspaper headlines. The couple find comfort in each other's company, and that night they go for a meal together. And this is when we realise that actually this woman has precognition, and that her visions of ghosts and destruction are not actually hallucinations. And so the war begins, the bombs are dropped, everything turns out the way the woman has seen. Those people she saw as ghosts are now dead, the buildings are crumbling, flames are burning, and they're left in the ruins of the city. Now the ending of this story is really good. I'm not going to spoil that. Go and check out the story, give it a listen, it's really atmospheric, really well written. Have you read this story? Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter, it's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show at Short SF Review. I'm on Facebook and Goodreads. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. I'm also posting these episodes onto my website, as well as some of my own short fiction at joncronshaw.com. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you've got any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, my email is joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Slow Bullets by Alistair Reynolds. This novella came out in 2015 and was published by Tachyon. Slow Bullets starts at the end of a war. And like most stories about intergalactic wars, there's always a few people left over who are still in the action even after the ceasefires come along. This is a story about memory, about remembering things, about culture, about identity. One of the key things that I like about this story is that every soldier has an implant that records their memories. It's basically a record of their thoughts and ideas, but also contains things like pictures of their family, and it literally acts in replacement of one's own memories. So if you do bad things when you're a soldier, then somebody else can remove this memory thing and look at it and make sure that, you didn't do bad things, and if you did, then you'll get punished for it. These memory storage devices are nicknamed slow bullets because of the way that they enter into the body. They're shot in and then they work their way through into the body and kind of settle somewhere near the lungs, near the heart, in the chest. But of course, this technology, these slow bullets, can be used for, let's say, more nefarious means. They can be used for torture. They kind of literally worm their way through the body. Now, if you make it so they act like a bullet, they go through muscles, they eat through limbs, it's quite a horrible device, really. What Reynolds does in this book that I really like is he raises a lot of questions about cultural identity and where our cultural identity is. For him, it resides in our shared knowledge, in our shared literature. And there's something that happens within this story where the literature, the religious text, the history of an entire system is about to be lost. What the crew do to get around this is quite amazing. I mean, obviously I don't want to spoil it, but it's really interesting. But what comes from this is different factions, different groups within the ship start bickering, start warring about the meaning of some of these memories, the dogma, a kind of, basically a religious war breaks out within this ship. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's @JLCronshaw. I'm also on Facebook. You can friend me on there. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. I'm also posting all these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. So let me know what you think. And until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to review We Have a Cultural Difference, Can I Taste You? By Rebecca Ann Jordan. The story was first published in April 2016 by Strange Horizons. This is a story about an alien, a creature that is very different to you and I. Its perceptions and values are, completely alien. We follow the story of one particular alien who has been enrolled into essentially the equivalent of the 80s cartoon Galaxy High, so an intergalactic school on a space station, perhaps a university, that includes students from various species. The story is written from the perspective of the alien, who is essentially a gelatinous blob. It has no eyesight, no sense of hearing, but it perceives the world through vibrations, through echolocation, through smell, touch, taste. And because of the way it interacts with the world, this causes problems with her roommate. Now, what I really like about this story is that it is really successfully told from the point of view of something alien. The descriptions are vivid, and you're really put into the perspective of this creature. Now, along with the observations and kind of strangeness of this, there's a really good story, a really good kind of theme of acceptance of cultural difference, of getting past cultural differences when they're so stark, when something seems so other, so foreign. And I think there's a bit of social commentary in this in terms of the aliens' planet got pretty much wiped out because they caught a human virus. And I don't see this as being too far removed from the things that have been going on in the Middle East, in Syria, with migration across Europe, the strange flux of feelings that the press and governments have been having towards refugees fleeing war-torn countries. And I think once you start reading this story as an allegory, it becomes very powerful. So along with this, we also get this idea of alienation, isolation, and also of grief. The main character's roommate, her grandmother, died, and we see through this alien how grief can manifest itself, but also how it can bring people together, it can bring hope. And by the end, it's actually quite tender, and we're left with this feeling that maybe things are going to be okay. Have you read it? What did you think? I'm on Twitter. It's @JLCronshaw. You can also follow the show. It's @ShortSFReview. I'm on Facebook. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. And you can follow me on Goodreads. I'm posting all of these episodes up onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. There you'll be able to see some of my own short fiction. The recent story I posted is called Eating, and it's basically a bit of a dark comedy about institutionalised cannibalism. And if you're enjoying the show, please leave a comment on iTunes. And if you just want to get in touch with me, send me any feedback or recommend some stories to me, my email is joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Flower, Mercy, Needle, Chain by Yoon-Ha Lee. The story was first published in Lightspeed magazine in September 2010. I read this in the year's best science fiction and fantasy number 28, edited by Garner Dezois. Flower, Mercy, Needle, Chain tells the story of Chiron, who is a female assassin who possesses an incredible weapon called Aragon's Flower. This weapon allows the user to not only kill the intended target, but also wipe out their entire ancestral line. The basic conceptual premise underpinning this story is the idea that free will and determinism both exist. These are often posited as binaries in philosophy. You have free will on the one hand, which is the idea that we can make choices about our future, make choices about our lives, and then you have determinism, which basically says that everything is already determined. Now, what this story does is it takes these ideas and messes around with them a little. And the way it does that is it posits the idea that causality is something that runs both backwards and forwards in time. So free will runs in the same way that life runs ordinarily along a straight timeline, going from past to future. Determinism, on the other hand, is seen as running from the omega point of the universe, the heat death of the universe, the end of everything, and then it goes backwards in time to the very start of the universe. Now, this is a bit of a weird idea to get your head round, but it allows for this tricky philosophical problem to be solved. The kinds of questions that the author's playing with, the kind of issues remind me of the writings of philosopher Jacques Derrida. And I think part of Derrida's game was he would often try and set up these oppositions, set up these binaries, and find ways to undermine them, to unpick their meaning, and ultimately to topple that binary. There are so many assumptions that we have with most narratives, with most stories, that this author is playing with. Even the existence of our main character is brought into question. There's a point in this story where she rolls up a painting. The painting shows a mountain. She says, "This is a place where I was born. This is a place where I lived. This place doesn't exist anymore. This place never existed." Her actions have made it so her own existence is called into question. Everything that you use to define your character, your place, your ancestry, your birth, your memories. What if these were erased? What if these were destroyed? Indeed, not just erased, but actually not even there in the first place. So nothing's certain, nothing's clear, nothing's defined. The story places fundamental uncertainties over its own narrative, and I think that's really interesting. That's rarely done. This is a really clever piece of work. What I also like about this is the complexity of the character and the atmosphere that you get from this story. It's very short, it's about 6 pages long, but it really manages to pull you into this weird world. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show. It's Short SF Review. I'm on Facebook and Goodreads. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. I'm also posting these onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. You'll also be able to find the iTunes links on my website, so you can just click through there, subscribe to the show. If you're enjoying it, let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback. Please leave a review on iTunes. My email's joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. So if you've got any suggestions for stories, I've had a few people email me with their own self-published stories. What I want to do with this podcast is to stick to stories that have been published in established markets. So this is magazines or anthologies. And I'm also trying to make it so they're accessible stories. I don't want them to be out of print. So get in touch. Let me know what you think. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing a story called Scrap Metal by Nan Craig. The story was first published in Arc magazine, issue 1.3, in September 2012. I listened to this on episode 524 of the Escape Pod podcast from March 2016. Scrap Metal tells a story of a soldier adjusting to life after leaving the army. But what makes this story interesting for me is that this is set in a future world where children from a young age are what's known as patched. And what this basically means is they are given implants to help them specialise for certain roles. So, for example, because our main character Mia is a soldier, she's given extra strength, extra intelligence in areas of problem solving and strategy. The story revolves around three key themes: identity, redundancy, and sacrifice. The theme of identity runs throughout this. When our main character is trying to adjust to her new life, she can't be the same person she was before she left to join the army. She can't be the same person she was when she was in the army. And so she's got to try and find this new identity, this new her. And with this sense of identity is also this idea of home and where your home is, where you belong. And our main character is from a small Welsh town called Port Talbot, a post-industrial town that a lot of its residents growing up try and leave. After leaving, she's drawn back there and she wants to stay there, but there's nothing for her. There's no work. And because of the way the society works, there's nothing that matches her specialism, and there's no economic incentives for businesses to essentially strip down this person and rebuild the patches. So this was published in 2012, a few years after the economic crash. So the idea of job surplus, of redundancy comes into this. What I really like is how the author uses this idea to make a comment on the way we deal with people, the way we deal with technology. When a piece of technology has been superseded by newer updates, new models, the old piece of technology is replaced, is redundant. And when technology becomes such a part of what makes us a person, becomes our humanity, then people become like those redundant pieces of technology. The final theme of sacrifice also plays throughout this. You have the sacrifices that were made by our main character, sacrificing a body, transforming herself into a killing machine to fight for a country. And then at the end of this story, another sacrifice comes. And for this reason, it's really powerful. So if you've not read it, check it out. It is on the Escape Pod podcast, so you can listen to it for free. So that's always good. And it's read by Cat Rambo, so even better. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show at Short SF Review. I'm on Facebook. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. And I'm also on Goodreads, so you can follow me on there. If you're enjoying these episodes, please leave a review on iTunes. That'd be really appreciated. And I'm posting all these episodes onto my website, along with my own original fiction at joncronshaw.com. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Observation Post by Mike Resnick. The story was first published in the 2013 anthology Beyond the Sun, and it's a sci-fi comedy about aliens observing Earth. The story is told in a series of communications between an alien commander and an observer in the orbit of Earth. So this alien's trying to see what humans' capabilities are as a species, and whether they're a threat to the galaxy, whether if they went to war with them, they'd win. Where the comedy comes in is this alien takes as its material films and TV shows. So, for example, it gets an understanding of our space technology through watching Star Wars, through watching Star Trek. It believes that our understanding of computer technology, of AIs, is far superior to their own, as it references data from Star Trek, Agent Smith from The Matrix, and the Terminator. The observer's also made aware of supernatural beings like vampires and zombies, and also of Dumbo, the flying elephant. Now, the tone of this is, as I say, it's a comedy, and it's very similar in tone to something like Red Shirts by John Scalzi. The alien also observes things like sports and sees them as a kind of warfare. He references American football and how pitched battles would take place with these armoured men. He also talks about football and says that people gather in an arena to watch humans kick around a defenceless animal. And then they talk about wrestling, or wrestling, which is basically the WWE-style sports entertainment wrestling. And he says, you know, you've got these big-muscled men beating the crap out of each other, hitting each other with chairs, and then they're none the worse for wear for it. So they see humans as being these kind of invincible beings that have amazing scientific abilities. They even talk about how a single human was able to defeat one of these Terminators, how a single human was able to use this magic power called the Force to defeat an evil empire. And so he gets a really kind of confused picture. And then it goes into the realm of superheroes, and this plays into the end of the story. Obviously, I don't want to ruin that, but it is really funny all the way through. It's well worth reading. I really enjoyed it. And for me, it does raise questions about what fiction says about us as a species. What does fiction say about humanity? How we can create all these inconsistent worlds. And maybe this alien race looked upon this and they don't have their own fiction. They didn't even conceive of this idea that, hey, maybe this stuff's made up. Maybe it's drama. Maybe it's fiction. And I said this in my introduction to this podcast in the introductory episode, that I believe stories are an evolutionary necessity, that the reason we're here is because of our ability to tell stories about what happens if you go to that part of the world, or what happens if you encounter these kind of creatures. So yeah, highly recommended. Check it out. Have you read this story? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also on Facebook. You can friend me on there. That's Jon Cronshaw, John without an H. I'm also posting these episodes up onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. If you're enjoying these episodes, please leave a review for me on iTunes. That would be great. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Speech Sounds by Octavia E. Butler. The story first appeared in Asimov's science fiction magazine in December 1983. I read this in her short story collection, Bloodchild and Other Stories from 1995, and it won the 1984 Hugo Award for Best Short Story. Speech Sounds is set in a post-apocalyptic America. Most of the population has been wiped out by an unknown disease, and those that have survived have seen serious degradation to their communication. Our main character is a former university professor who is no longer able to read, and it seems that most of the people in this world are unable to speak, unable to read, and their communication is in guttural sounds, sign language, body language. Our main character is very lonely, she's isolated. This is one of the key themes of this story. It's the idea of finding love, finding companionship, finding friendship in a world where communication is limited, in a world surrounded by death, disease, destruction. And frankly, it's quite a heartbreaking story, the way that the plot progresses. What I think sets this apart from a lot of post-apocalyptic stories is we are left with a sense of hope at the end of this. A sense that although things might not be able to get back to the way they were before the calamity, everything isn't lost. So if you've not read this story, it's highly recommended. It's one of my favourites. Octavia Butler is a unique voice in science fiction. I would have a read of the Bloodchild collection and her novel Kindred as a broad introduction to her work. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show, which is at ShortSFReview. I'm posting all these podcasts onto my website along with my own short fiction, which is joncronshaw.com. You can friend me on Facebook and follow me on Goodreads. It's Jon Cronshaw, that's John without an H. You can also subscribe to the show if you haven't already through iTunes. If you're enjoying it, please do leave a positive review. That will be greatly appreciated. If you've got any feedback, any questions, any suggestions for stories that I might like, please send me an email to joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. So until next time, cheerio.
Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I am going to be reviewing The Egg by Andy Weir. The story was published in August 2009 on Andy Weir's own website, which is galactanet.com. So you can go and view that story for free, so that's always good. Without giving too much away, the story is basically about a man who dies and has a conversation with, is it God, perhaps? Some kind of transcendental being, let's say. What I like about this story, it's a kind of simple, superficial dip into the philosophy of religion, into things like Hindu philosophy, the idea that we are all one with everything, that we are God, we are the world, everyone is connected. It has a lot of cool little ideas about time and space and the universe, the nature of the universe, what is the universe. And these are good little, as I say, kind of superficial jumping blocks into, I suppose, a deeper examination of these ideas. Is it science fiction? Well, I think it is, because it does deal with what the universe is and what its purpose is. Some people might regard this as a fantasy novel. I mean, to me, these borders are useful for publishers more than anything else. For me, it's a work of speculative fiction, so it doesn't really bother me. What I would say is, if you enjoy this story, it touches on some cool ideas, but they're explored in better ways. I'd say the novel White Apples by Jonathan Carroll, who really goes into this idea and explores this idea of the universe and humanity and spirit and the purpose of life and death and time. And I think it's a really cool thing. So Andy Weir story, it's fun. Nice little introduction to these ideas, but it's not going to blow your mind. It's just a nice little discussion, nice little introduction. So let me know what you think of the story. Do you agree? Do you think it is mind-blowing? Do you think I'm missing the point? I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm on Facebook. You can friend me there. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. I'm also on Goodreads, so you can follow me on there as well. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Cat Pictures, Please by Naomi Kritzer. The story first appeared in Clarkesworld magazine in January 2015 and tells the story of a sentient AI. The central theme of this story is about interference. It's about this AI that tries to develop a moral code, that wants to help people, that wants to do good. And so it uses algorithms to try and improve people's lives. The AI probably knows people better than they know themselves, so it uses algorithms to try and influence persons' decisions to make their lives better. And because this is a sentient AI, it's self-aware, it's also aware of the perception of artificial intelligence by the public. Indeed, it's smart enough to know that it can't even let its creators know that it's self-aware in case it gets destroyed. So the AI has to act quite subtly, act more as a guiding hand, throwing hints and suggestions indirectly to the people it sees as necessary to help. Now, what I really like about this story is, along with this really serious discussion about self-improvement, about how people act against their own best interests, there's also something whimsical. The AI loves cat pictures, and it's the quality of cat pictures that lead it to the people it's going to help. Throughout the story, we would dip into the lives of three different characters, three different people that the AI is helping, and these have all got issues that need to be resolved. From a woman who really hates her job and suffers with depression, to a pastor who is a closet homosexual. And the AI's interferences have mixed results. So have you read this story? I really liked it. Check it out. You can read it for free on the Clarkesworld website. It's also on their podcast feed. I'm posting these podcasts onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. I'm also posting some of my own short fiction on there. I'm currently in the process of editing a series of short stories myself, which I'm hoping to release on Kindle soon. I'll give you more details about that soon. You can follow the show on Twitter. It's at ShortSFReview, and you can follow me personally. It's at JL Cronshaw. And if you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to leave a review on iTunes. That'd be really appreciated. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing To Be or Not To Be by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. The story was first published in the Worlds of If science fiction magazine from January 1962. I listened to this as a recording on LibriVox because this story is now in the public domain. To Be or Not To Be is set in a future utopia. In America in about 200 years, this story says that the world's population will be brought under control. There will be no war, no famine, no death, no disease. People will live long and happy lives. But as with most utopias, we get to a point where
something is wrong. We realise that there's something a bit dark underneath, something a bit sinister, perhaps a bit sinister to our standards, but something sinister nonetheless. Combined with the limits on population, with the long lives of the world's citizens, we have a programme of state-sponsored gas chambers. Now, this is voluntary, so if you feel like you're ready to take that next step, you can dial this number, which is 2BR02B on your phone, and you can volunteer to die. So this all sounds great, all sounds wonderful in a kind of sinister way. But then we get to a point where triplets are born. What we find out is that it is a one-in, one-out system. So if you have a child, then it's expected that someone will have to volunteer to die. And they usually say that this is usually an elderly member of the family, usually maternal grandfather, something like that. They usually volunteer, it's a tradition thing. But when it's triplets, there has to be 3 volunteers. So at the end of this story, we get the crisis point with the father. He's deciding what to do, how he's going to get these 3 volunteers, and it's a great little twist. Now, I'm a huge Kurt Vonnegut fan. He's probably up there as one of my favourite authors. If ever I can't think of an author to read, if I'm stuck for something to read, Kurt Vonnegut's always my go-to guy. He's got one of my favourite characters. He doesn't appear in this, unfortunately. The reoccurring character, Kilgore Trout, who's the greatest science fiction writer who ever lived, who could only get published in pornographic magazines. Now, I recently reread God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater by Vonnegut, and this story is actually referred to as a story by Kilgore Trout, but it's not actually the same story. The plot that he gives is different, but it's obviously a name that Kurt Vonnegut was interested in. I mean, we've got this idea of population growth, the idea of death, and the idea of trauma, death, all these kind of things permeate throughout Vonnegut's work. He was obsessed with how the world would end. And not to give too much of a spoiler on his novels, but most of them seem to end with the end of the world in some way, shape or form. Have you read it? What did you think? I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show. It's at Short SF Review. I'm on Goodreads and Facebook. It's Jon Cronshaw. It's John without an H. And if you're enjoying these shows, please take a moment to visit my website, leave a comment. It's joncronshaw.com. Or you could leave some feedback on iTunes. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Fate of Mice by Susan Palwick. The story first appeared in Asimov's magazine in January 2005. I read this in Best Science Fiction of 2006, edited by Rich Horton. The Fate of Mice is a story about a mouse, and it's also a story about stories. It tells a story of a lab mouse who has had its intelligence boosted. Now, this idea has been done before in stories like Flowers for Algernon and some of David Brin's work, but what makes this different is it is focused on the mouse and how the mouse deals with its own sense of imprisonment and frustration at being trapped in the lab. Now, I mentioned that this story is about stories, and throughout, the mouse for some reason has dreams, has visions about stories involving mice. Now, this mouse has never seen these stories or been exposed to these stories in any way before, but is concerned throughout about the fate of mice in human stories. So we get references to things like Cinderella, to Stuart Little, to Flowers for Algernon. And throughout this, there's a human drama going on in the background. There's divorce, there's conflict, there's all these things going on, but that's subsumed by the position of the mouse. Now, what I think's really effective about this one is that it raises ethical questions about using animals for research. At what point is an animal too intelligent to exploit in the name of science? If an animal is raised to the intelligence level of a human, is it right to keep it locked in a cage, to remove its own agency, its own ability to make choices? Have you read this story? What did you think? I'm on Twitter, it's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show at Short SF Review. I'm posting these episodes along with my own short fiction on joncronshaw.com. That's John without an H. You can also friend me on Facebook and Goodreads. And if you're enjoying the show, please take a moment just to leave a review on iTunes. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Star by Arthur C. Clarke. The story first appeared in Infinity magazine in 1955. I read this in a collection called The Hugo Winners 1955 to 1961, edited by Isaac Asimov. The Star tells a story of space Catholics who have come to visit the Phoenix Nebula, which is 6,000 light years from Earth. It's a story about the clash between science and faith. Like most Arthur C. Clarke stories, this is pretty weak on the characterization front. All we can say about our main protagonist is that he is a space Catholic. He's a Jesuit and an astronomer. If you want to know anything about his personality, about his drives, anything like that, then it's not in this story. And this is one thing I do actually find quite frustrating when I'm reading Arthur C. Clarke. He's amazing at describing the wonder of space. He's an excellent world builder, but characters, he's just very weak. That being said, though, I did really enjoy this story. The main plot involved a mission going to this Phoenix Nebula to go and look at the remnants of supernovae from the past. As the astronomers approach the system, they realise that there's still a planet within its orbit, and throughout our narrator's talking about this idea of how his faith was questioned because of this discovery. And it's only at the very end when we discover why. On this planet that was discovered, they found a monolith, not too dissimilar to the one in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And this monolith was essentially a time capsule put together by the civilization that used to live within this star system. They were very similar to us, it seems, humanoid in shape, they had language, they had visual communication. And where this links in to the faith idea at the end is that the Jesuit priests works out that when this supernova happened, it would have been seen around 2,000 years ago above Bethlehem. So the implication being that this star that was seen in the sky was a supernova, that in order to create that image of the bright star in the sky, an entire civilization had to be destroyed. And what kind of God would do that? So have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show. It's Short SF Review. I'm posting all these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW. I'm also on Facebook and Goodreads, so you're more than welcome to friend me on there. And if you have a moment, please do leave a review on iTunes. That would be great. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Delhi by Vandana Singh. The story first appeared in a 2004 anthology, Been Long Dreaming, which is a collection of post-colonial science fiction stories. Delhi tells a story of a bit of an outsider, a man living on the fringes of society. He wanders the streets of Delhi, looking bedraggled, and is often treated with suspicion and fear. But this man has fleeting glimpses into the past, into the future, and occasionally even interacts with those glimpses, with those people he sees. He believes that some of the interactions that he's had with people of the past might actually influence the future, influence the present, and so it raises questions about causality, about determinism, about the possibility of free will. There's quite a bit of this story that reminds me of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, and this is because the author extrapolates certain social issues that are going on in Delhi. The idea that the police get rid of homeless people whenever there's foreign dignitaries visiting the city. And so he gets glimpses into this world where homeless people, disabled people, sick people, poor people are all living in the abandoned metro tunnels beneath the city, while the surface above the city is gleaming beautiful, futuristic, spaceships flying around and huge skyscrapers, while these people are imprisoned underground. They never see the sun. They're unhealthy, they're pale. It's really good social commentary. And throughout this story, it's interwoven with a lot of intrigue. There's a bit of an element of a search. He's looking for a girl, the image of who is printed out for him, and one day he spots her. And this is really interesting, the way that all this kind of comes together and how this is resolved at the end of the story. Or is it? Have you read it? What do you think? I'm on Twitter. It's at ShortSFReview. You can also follow me personally. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm posting these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. I'm also posting my own short stories. One of my recent ones is called Reaching for a Larlin, which is a fantasy story about a snow dragon. If you're enjoying these shows, please leave a comment on iTunes. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Steve Fever by Greg Egan. The story was first published in the November-December 2007 issue of Technology Review. I read this in the year's Best Science Fiction 2008, edited by Gardner Dozois. Steve Fever tells the story of a boy who is infected by nanorobots that take over his mind and essentially turn people into zombies for about a month at a time in order to get them to carry out strange tasks. The backdrop to this story is that a medical researcher who designed nanorobots with the ability to think and make decisions found out that he was dying of cancer. Now, this was a form of cancer that could not be cured, so he turned his robots onto finding a cure for this type of cancer. To do this, he gave the robots the ability to self-replicate, to use animal hosts to increase their computing capacity, and he set them the task to either find a cure, or, if he didn't survive, to find a way to bring him back to life. Now, these nanobots had access to all the information on the internet, everything online, and were able to draw things from human minds. The problem comes when Steve does die, but he dies in a car crash and is burned to death. So these autonomous robots essentially run roughshod over humanity. They take over people, they take over cities, all with the single task in mind to bring Steve back to life. What I really like about this is it's essentially a story about the importance of intuition, of our ability to discern fact from fiction with very little data. So what these robots do is they essentially run a long series of drawn-out experiments, testing every single theory they find online and in people's imaginations about how to bring people back to life. And they do this by testing every single variable, every single assertion, but the experiments are based on nonsense. The story reminds me of Louis Bourgeois' On Exactitude in Science, which is a story where cartographers design a map that's so detailed it's the exact same size of the empire that it represents. It's pointless, it's useless, it's a waste of time. And this is essentially what's happened with these robots. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show. It's Short SF Review. Posting these shows onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. You can leave comments there if you want. I'm also on Facebook and Goodreads, so you can find me on there. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. And if you're enjoying these shows, please do share the links. And if you have a moment, please leave a review on iTunes. That would be really appreciated. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Banalist by Carrie Vaughan. The story first appeared in the 2015 anthology The End Does Come. This is part of the Apocalypse Triptych, edited by John Joseph Adams. Banalist is set in a post-apocalyptic world where most of civilization has been destroyed by floods, environmental disasters, extreme weather, by disease. All these things come at once. So the population has been reduced to low levels, and so the way that society is structured, in America at least, it seems that people live in small groups called families. They're essentially forced to live in these households, performing whatever duties are required. So, for example, in this story, it's an apricot cannery, and if you want to move to a different family, then you have to pay the authorities in order to do that. So this is a story essentially around the theme of legitimacy. In this society, an illegitimate child is one that is born without permission from the authorities. It seems that a family earns the right to have a child by doing a certain amount of work, and if they've done a certain amount of work, then they're awarded a banner. This is a physical banner, a tapestry that is hung in the house, and it gives the permission for a woman to have one child. The issue comes in this story when our main character becomes pregnant. She's removed her contraceptive implants and gets pregnant without a banner. Now, the story is structured in the same way that something like a parlour mystery would be, because the key question that this story is about is who reported the pregnant woman. Was it the violent, oppressive head of the family? Was it one of the younger girls jealous? Was it one of the older women who wanted a banner? As well as this idea of legitimacy, you've also got this idea of agency, our ability to control what we do with our lives, our rights over our own physical being, our rights over our body. It raises questions about to what extent authorities, states, governments have control over your individual body, over your procreation, over your individual agency? This is a question I thought about a lot a few years ago. Within the space of a year, my wife gave birth to a son, and in that same year, I was called to do jury duty. Now, in the UK, I don't know what it's like in different countries, but in the UK, if you're called for jury duty, you've got to do it. You are compelled by law to do it. If you don't do it, then you will be locked up. When you have a child, you have people come round your house, health visitors, social workers, just to kind of check things are okay. But these people have that power to take away your child if they don't think things are going well. So it did bother me that the idea that you have this agency, you have this freedom, this liberty, there's a lot of talk about freedom and liberty, but at the end of the day, the state, the government, have a say over where you are, what you do with your child. And so I think this story raises a lot of questions about that. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show. It's at ShortSFReview. I'm posting these onto my website, along with my own short fiction, which is joncronshaw.com. That's John without an H. I'm also on Goodreads and Facebook, so you can find me on there. And if you're enjoying these shows, please take a moment to either share one with your friend or leave a review on iTunes. Anything to help spread the word about the show, that'd be great. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Minority Report by Philip K. Dick. The story was first published by Fantastic Fiction in 1956. I read this in a collection called The Minority Report and Other Stories from 2002. This is a collection I think was a tie-in to the movie of the same name, and it's a movie that I haven't actually seen. I don't tend to watch many films. I think I usually watch maybe 3 or 4 films in a year, so this one has passed me by as a movie. The Minority Report tells a story of a dystopian future where precognition exists. Mutants with the ability to predict the future are essentially enslaved by the police and are used to detect future crimes. Like most Philip K. Dick stories, he creates a really claustrophobic, paranoid atmosphere. There's lots of twists and turns on the way, lots of intrigue, lots of mystery. This story gets going when the guy who invented the Pre-Crimes Bureau reads a report that says that he is going to commit a murder. In this society, if you are predicted to carry out a crime, then you are essentially guilty of that crime, even though you haven't actually done it. Now, what this story does really effectively is it takes this idea of precognition, of being able to see in the future, and it raises all these questions about determinism, about the possibility of predicting the future, about whether this idea of pre-guilt is something that is ethical, is something that is right. The story is very weak when it comes to characterization. All of the characters in this speak with the same voice, which at points makes it confusing as to which character is which. But what Philip K. Dick does so well in this story is he creates this paradox, which is actually resolved in a really satisfying way at the end. And this paradox is, if somebody can predict the future, they can tell you what your future's going to be. Can you change it? And if you do change it, what does that say about the prediction? So you get this kind of weird circularity, this situation where both things can't be at the same time. It's really well done. Why I was reminded of this story recently was I read a news story about police in the UK starting to use predictive software to essentially work out where they think crimes are going to take place. Now, it's not on the same level as arresting people before they've committed a crime, but there is this uncanniness, this uneasiness about this idea that human behaviour is so predictable and can be essentially whittled down to a series of algorithms. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show. It's Short SF Review. Now, these episodes haven't been coming out quite as quickly as I'd like at the moment, and the reason for this is because I am actually editing a novel that I've written, which is a first book in a trilogy called The Slip. The first book, which has the working title As the Gravity Flipped, is a dystopian murder mystery set in a post-Earth solar system. So I'll hope to give you more news on that soon. So that is actually taking up much of my spare time at the moment. If you want to follow me on Facebook, it's Jon Cronshaw, that's John without an H, and you can follow me on Goodreads. I'm also posting these to my website, which is joncronshaw.com. There I'm also posting some of my own fiction, so you're more than welcome to read that and leave comments there. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Velvet Fields by Anne McCaffrey. The story was first published by World of If in 1973. I read this on the Lightspeed magazine website and it's available to read now for free. And I'm always a big fan of free fiction, especially when the author's getting paid. If you've not read this story, this is going to be a spoilerific episode because a lot of the themes of the story come right near the end. So go and read it. Come back. That's my advice if you've not read it before. Velvet Fields tells a story of colonists who go and visit an alien planet. This planet is described like the Garden of Eden. The fields are perfect, velvet-like. The trees are as if arranged in parkland. But it seems that the cities of this planet have been abandoned. So with this, the colonists move in to the cities and they start to cultivate the land. Now this is a story with the theme of unintended consequences, about cause and effect, about how sometimes our actions can have devastating effects on things without us really realising it. So we find out through the story that actually this planet hasn't been abandoned, that instead the aliens go through a very specific and unusual life cycle where they start as plants and essentially rise through different states of being into something sentient. For people who've read Orson Scott Card's Speak for the Dead, this is a bit like the Picaninos, how they develop from being like grubs into pig-like creatures and then into trees at the end of their life cycle. Now, because the humans start to cultivate this land, because they start to impact on the world, they change the ecosystem and the biosphere, and the consequences of this mean that the new plants interact with the first stage of these aliens' development, and so a lot of these aliens are born stunted with disabilities, and that's if they're lucky. The rest of them have been killed, an unintentional genocide. So because of this, the human colonists, as well-intentioned, as well-meaning as they were, have to pay reparations for their actions. Now, I'm not going to spoil what this is. You know, if you've not read it, it's still worth reading if you've got to this point and you haven't read the story yet. What I like about this story is it does raise a lot of ethical questions, whether it's right to introduce species into an already pre-existing ecosystem. Highly recommend this story. It's not very long, it's about 3,000 words. Go check it out. Have you read it? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show. It's Short SF Review. Posting these, as well as my own short fiction, onto my website. And as mentioned last time, I've not been getting these episodes out as quickly as I'd like, and that's because I am in the final stages of editing my novel, which is called As the Gravity Flipped. And it's the first book in what might be a trilogy. It might be more. I'm not sure yet. So I'll have more news on that when I know more myself. In the meantime, if you're enjoying these shows, please do recommend them to a friend. Or if you've got no friends, why not leave me a review on iTunes? That'd be great. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Peacock Cloak by Chris Beckett. The story was first published by Asimov's magazine in 2010. I listened to this on the Clark's World podcast from October 2015. Peacock Cloak is a story that straddles the genres of fantasy and science fiction and is something of a meditation on the idea of power and about how power can manifest itself. In this story we have 7 gods, godlike beings perhaps. It's not clear what they are. There's part of me feeling that it's almost an augmented kind of reality. It's ambiguous, but that's by no means a bad thing. Indeed, it's very clever the way the author keeps you second guessing what is actually going on. The Peacock Cloak refers to an item of clothing worn by our main character. It is a powerful cloak covered in hundreds of eyes like a peacock's tail. But this cloak is self-aware and advises its wearer. It also gives the wearer the ability to hide things in hidden pockets and to give them the impression of being more powerful than they actually are. All of the godlike beings referred to in this story possess a single quality derived from the same central being, our main character has the quality of strength of will at the centre of his personality. And so through the story, we see him orchestrate wars, push through innovations and inventions, acts ruthlessly, with little regard for the lives that he damages. At the end, this is a story about regret and forgiveness, and our main character is confronted by the main being the father figure. And they have a conversation overlooking a lake at sunset, where our main character, his hands are open, he's apologising, he's regretful, but the father kind of realises that they're also his regrets too, that they're derived from his own nature, they must be part of him. And so it's very sad, it's very touching. Now, I think Chris Beckett is one of the most underrated science fiction authors of today. His sense of place and world and character are just fantastic. And if you enjoy this story, I would highly recommend you read his novels, Dark Eden, Mother of Eden, and I believe there's a follow-up coming out quite soon for that, so I'm quite excited about that. I think it's called Daughter of Eden, so check that out. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show. It's at ShortSF Review. I'm posting these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW. I'm also posting some of my own short fiction onto my website. My latest story is called To Grip the Bright White Chains, which is a post-apocalyptic story about an elderly woman who deals drugs. I'd love to hear your comments on that, any feedback. So if you visit my website, it's joncronshaw.com. Leave a comment there, that would be really appreciated. You can also be my friend on Facebook and Goodreads. Just search for Jon Cronshaw, that's John without an H. And if you're enjoying the show, please do tell a friend. Or, alternatively, please leave a review or a rating on iTunes. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Lambing Season by Molly Gloss. The story was first published by Asimov's magazine in July 2002. I read this in the year's Best Science Fiction 20th edition from 2003, edited by Gardner Dozois. Lambing Season is a first contact story about a shepherd called Delia. After one of her sheep is attacked by a coyote, she sees a green and yellow flash in the sky, and something lands a few miles away. So she treks in the dark across the wilderness to find the broken remnants of a spacecraft. Around it she sees a creature, a little bit like a dog, a little bit like a man, and we have this strange tension going on between them, neither of them knowing what to make of the situation. This story has the main themes of solitude, of understanding, and of death. The theme of solitude comes in because our main character doesn't see people for months at a time. She speaks to someone once a week who delivers the shopping, but apart from that, it's just her and her dogs. This idea of understanding also comes out with the communication between the alien and our main character, as well as the close relationship she has with her dogs. The idea of death comes through in this work. We have a coyote attack one of the lambs and the lamb bleeds out. The sheep around it are distraught. It's a very upsetting scene. And it comes again at the end of the story. Obviously, I don't want to spoil how that goes, but it's very moving, very touching. And it leads on to a revelation and a new interest is born. What I really like about this story is the sense of place that you get with Molly Gloss's writing. If you've ever read something like No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy, where it's about the land, it's about nature, it's about the insignificance of humans within that surrounding, this is what this story kind of picks up on. And I think it does it really well. I think Molly Gloss's writing is really evocative, really emotional, and so it's definitely worth checking out. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also get in touch with the show. It's at ShortSF Review. I'm posting these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. That's John without an H. And if you're enjoying these shows, please take a moment to share the links from the Audio Boom page. Alternatively, if you could leave a review on iTunes, that would be great. If you've got any other feedback about the show, please get in touch by email. It's joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Tourism by M. John Harrison. The story was first published in 2004. I read this in the Mammoth Book of the Best New SF Annual Collection number 18, edited by Gardner Dozois. Tourism is a very strange space opera story set on a far-flung planet in a town called Venusport. The story revolves around the people in a bar called Black Cat, White Cat, the name of which draws its reference from a strange occurrence in the port known as The Event, which seems to be some kind of wormhole or portal to a different place. From this event come black and white cats, literally by the hundreds and thousands. It's very strange. The story doesn't seem to have a main character. What happens is we kind of head hop between different people who enter this bar or pass this bar. So we get what we believe will be the main character, our adventurer, a guy called Jack Serotonin. This guy seems to take a certain type of rich woman on adventures into this strange event zone. And in this story, he meets up with someone called Irene and takes her away. And then he's left. He's gone from the story, only to return later on. And so among the other characters, we have the owner of the bar called Viv Hula, who seems to have a strange relationship with all the other characters in the story. There's another character who is described as a fat man called Antoine, who seems to be one of these people who lets the world go by him. But at the same time, there's something else deeper within his personality that is hinted at but isn't quite shown. There are also two really interesting characters in this. The first is a fighter, and the second is some kind of sex worker, maybe a porn star, maybe a prostitute. It isn't quite clear. But these two have a relationship. They're together. Now, the fighter's involved in this kind of gladiatorial battle. Every night he has a fight essentially to the death, and every night his personality is downloaded into a new body. Now, what I think the author does that's really interesting here is he draws a parallel between the sex worker and the fighter, essentially saying that they're both in fields where it's about their body, it's about the abuse that their body takes, that's how they make their money, and at the same time they're both performers. They're both constantly having to put on this act. And there's a worry that the next fight will be the last fight, that the technique for resurrecting the fighter's mind will at some point fail. So there's this constant risk hanging over them, this constant fear of death. As we find out about all these different people and the various imagery that goes on and just this really weird, intense kind of writing, Jack Serotonin returns. He's been on some kind of adventure. He's described as being like bruised face and half his clothes ripped off, and it looks like he's been running through oil. And he comes to the bar, he's out of breath and demands a drink. And so it's really interesting. It inverts this idea of space opera being all about the adventure, all about the action. The adventure's going on, yes, but we don't get to see it as readers. And that's really clever, that's really interesting. At the end of the story, we get the return of Irene, the tourist, and the ending's really odd, really ambiguous. Have you read it? What did you think? I'm really looking forward to seeing this author at the weekend at the Edgelit Convention in Derby. He's going to be there along with Alistair Reynolds, so that's quite exciting. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also follow the show, which is at Short SF Review. I'm on Facebook and Goodreads, so you can friend me on there. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H. And if you're enjoying these shows, please take a moment to share them with a friend, or you could leave a review on the podcast portal of your choice. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. The story was first published by Tor.com. This is a story about cultural difference, about identity, and about what it means to have a sense of self within a community. A main character is a 16-year-old girl who's incredibly gifted at maths, and so she gets accepted into a university which is in a different solar system. We find out that she's from a tribe that doesn't travel, has its roots in mysticism, but this is a mysticism that is rooted firmly in mathematics. It's a tribe that covers up its own identity, where the people cover up their skin with clay, so their real skin isn't revealed. What works really well with this is we have this layering of otherness, this layering of alienation. We have our protagonist. She's a part of this tribe. This tribe is seen as a bit of an anomaly within its planet, a bit of an oddity, a bit of a strange culture. She's the first person from this tribe to ever get accepted to this university. And when she actually decides to take up the invite to go, she becomes alienated from her family, from her tribe. And so we get this otherness from the wider society. We get the otherness of the main character. And then the key thing of the story is that she goes onto a ship to travel to this university and everybody gets killed by aliens. Now, these aliens are called the Medusa, and they're essentially like jellyfish. And I think this is where the story kind of goes downhill for me a little bit, because we started off with this really interesting discussion about culture, about politics, about life, about identity, and then it essentially becomes a locked room horror story for quite a while. And in the middle section, the plot kind of jumps around a little bit. We learn, for example, that all the friends she's made on this trip have been killed, that she's the only survivor. Were these friends established? No. We get her mourning for their loss, but we don't have the journey of her making friends with them. We don't have any attachment to these people. And I think maybe a few paragraphs, a few pages extra on this story to kind of establish those friendships a bit more would have made it a much better story. Now, once the horror elements kind of dissipate, Binti realises that she's got this ancestral object that she's inherited that she can use to talk to the aliens. And so this turns from being a story about identity, about finding your way in the world, to a story about horror and being frightened of the other, to a story about outreach. And again, there are elements of this that I think are really well done, really good. The ending left me feeling a little bit flat. Now, those who follow me on Goodreads will see that I gave this story 4 stars. Overall, this isn't a 4-star story, but I felt that the beginning was so strong, so interesting, so intriguing, that there's definitely hints of brilliance there. I think what the author does really well is convey a sense of mood and a sense of cultural priorities that are different to my own. So as I say, a bit of a weird one. The plotting's actually quite weak, but there's a lot in the story to really enjoy. Have you read it? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also tweet the show at ShortSFReview. You can also friend me on Facebook and Goodreads. It's Jon Cronshaw. That's John without an H, so it's JONCRONSHAW. You can also check out my website, which is joncronshaw.com. I've posted past episodes of the show onto there, plus some of my own short fiction. And if you really enjoy this show, please do recommend it to a friend and leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Standard Loneliness Package by Charles Yu. The story first appeared in Lightspeed magazine in 2010. I listened to an audio version of this on the Lightspeed magazine podcast. Standard Loneliness Package is a story about outsourcing emotions. It's this idea that the hardest moments in your life, whether it's physical pain, grief, guilt, sadness, all these things, they can be outsourced for somebody else to experience for a price. Now, this story is told from the perspective of somebody who works in what is essentially a call centre, and their job is to take over people's consciousness to experience their emotions in their place. Now, this is the third thing I've read by Charles Yu. I read his novel How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, and I recently read his story Fable in The New Yorker, which, although it doesn't fit the remit of this podcast because it's more of a kind of fantasy fairy tale kind of story, I would highly recommend reading that because it is excellent. But what Charles Yu does so well is he really brings out the emotion of the story. There's a deep sense of sadness, of depression, of despair, but it's also a feeling that is somehow removed, that is somehow deflected. It's not quite denial because the person in the centre of the story is aware of the feelings, but there's definitely a sense that they're being suppressed or repressed in some weird way, as well as understanding the emotional life of our main character and the emotional life of the people he inhabits. We also get a glimpse into a rather dystopian world where people's consciousnesses and emotions are dealt with like any other commodity. And it raises questions about what price to have a life, what price to support your family in ways that aren't necessarily beneficial to yourself. It raises questions about self-sacrifice, about how far you would go for your family, even when it's detrimental to your own well-being. Now, considering this is a short story, it's very layered. Along with these themes, we also get a very strange love story going on. And the woman the man falls in love with doesn't fully reciprocate. but kind of goes along with it anyway. It's really strange. It's really sad. I'm not going to spoil where this story goes, but it's well worth checking out. Everything else I've listened to or read by Charles Yu, I've really enjoyed. Have you read it? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. You can also tweet the show. It's at ShortSFReview. I'm posting these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW. I'm also on Goodreads and Facebook, so you can friend me on there. And for regular listeners, if you're wondering why there's been such a gap between these episodes, it's because my laptop broke. So I turned on my laptop one day to do a bit of writing, and it went clunk. The hard drive made a weird noise. I tried it again. Nothing. Luckily, I back up. I've got into the habit of backing up a couple of times a day. So I didn't lose much. I lost about a morning's work. But still, it's been incredibly frustrating. I've had no internet, apart from on my phone, and I'm having to rely on the goodwill of others to upload these episodes until I get something sorted. So if you haven't already and you're enjoying these episodes, please leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice. Or if you could help us out by sharing these episodes with a friend, you can actually go onto the Audio Boom site, find the Short SF Review channel, and embed the player onto your own websites, into tweets, etc. It's really easy. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Goodnight Moons by Ellen Claudius. The story was first published in Life on Mars, The New Frontier, edited by Jonathan Strahm, and published in 2011. Goodnight Moons tells the story of the first party to visit Mars. Our main character is a female engineer who discovers that she's pregnant while midway through the voyage, and eventually gives birth to the child while on Mars. So on the surface, it's basically a story about the first Martian baby. Revolves around difficult choices about debates surrounding childbirth, fertility, whether it's ethical to keep the child for the sake of the mission. Now this story I think would make an excellent counterpart to Andy Weir's The Martian. In The Martian we get the immediacy of the situation, man's battle with nature, man's battle with Mars, and the will to survive against all odds. This story has much more emotional depth. And this is a bit of a spoiler alert now. Because of our physiology, because of the way the child develops, we find out in the last third of the story that it'll be impossible for the child to return to Earth. So she is the first pioneer of this new planet. And we see a lot of parallels here with American history, the idea of the frontier lands, the idea of living and going to unknown worlds, unknown places, to make a new home, to make a new life. Now this is a really powerful story. I'm actually a little sad that it wasn't written as a novel, because I think there's a lot to this story. There's a lot more depth that could be explored by the author. I want to know more about how the child grows up. I want to know more about the child's life. I want to know about the missions that come to Mars beyond the initial one, and how the fact that there's a child on there growing that can't return to Earth, how that affects the direction of NASA's mission. So yeah, highly recommended story. It's probably the best one in that collection. Have you read it? What did you think? You can get in touch with me. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. That's JLCRONSHAW. I'm also posting these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. I've also taken up the Ray Bradbury Challenge, which, if you're not aware of that, it's a lot of fun. For 1,000 days, you read one short story, a poem, and an essay. Now, because I'm severely visually impaired, what I'm doing is listening to poems on podcasts, listening to stories on podcasts or audio. I'm also reading the ebooks. I can read ebooks fine because I can adjust the size of the font. To tick the essay box, I'm listening to things like TED Talks and some Radio 4 programmes and other non-fiction and seminar shows. At the time of recording this, I'm on day 4, so this will form part of my challenge. And it's also on the Short Science Fiction Review podcast, which is always fun as well. And along with the reading aspect of the challenge, there's a writing aspect, which is to write 52 short stories over a year, so that's one story a week. Now, I've already written the short story. I wrote that yesterday for this week. And I'm also writing the final act of my new novel. So as you can imagine, I'm very busy at the moment. If you want to follow my progress on the Ray Bradbury Challenge and check out my website, it's joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW. If you're doing a similar challenge, let me know. I'd love to see what you're reading, what you're doing. You can email me. It's joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. And if you're enjoying these shows, please do leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. So a review on iTunes will help us and get more people listening to the show. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing All You Zombies by Robert Heinlein. The story is first published in Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine in 1959. I listened to this on episode 200 of the Escape Pod podcast. All You Zombies is essentially a time travel paradox story in which we are led in a strange web of causal loops and paradoxes. I'm a big fan of Robert Heinlein, but when I go into his stories I always think to myself, I wonder what kind of pervy thing is going to invoke this time. Is it going to be incest? Is it going to be sex with dubiously aged girls? And of course, with this story, he doesn't disappoint. There's a bit in this story where the man does seduce a 17-year-old girl. There is a bit in this story where our main character does seduce a 17-year-old girl. But spoiler alert, this 17-year-old girl is actually a younger version of himself. When the story opens, we're introduced to our main character, a bartender from the future, and he's talking to a man who describes himself as an unmarried mother, writing for 4 cents a word, writing confessional stories. We start to learn a bit about this person, and it ends up that this unmarried mother is actually an unmarried mother. He was born as both male and female, and we find out that as a woman, she'd given birth to a baby daughter called Jane. Now, by the end of this story, we find out that the bartender is the unmarried mother. The unmarried mother gave birth to Jane, and Jane is also the unmarried mother. They're all the same person. He's essentially his own mother, father, daughter, and the bartender planned this out all along to be this way. Of course, this is where it gets complicated, because we do get all these kind of causal paradoxes and that immediate jolt of, wait, how does that work? As time travel fiction, it is consistent internally, but the idea of someone causing himself is very strange, and it also raises all these questions about existence and identity. If you can have a conversation with versions of yourself, if you can give birth to a version of yourself, which one is the real self? Are they all the same self? Are they different selves? The title of the story comes from a statement where he says, I know who I am, but who are all you zombies? And it's this idea that he cannot conceive of these other people being himself. So from the thin veneer of this being a Robert Heinlein kind of action-y adventure story with a bit of perviness thrown in there, it's actually really quite a complex and deep exploration of the idea of time travel, about the idea of causality, about the idea of identity, existence, ontology, all these things kind of bundled into this. And most importantly, it's a lot of fun. Have you read it? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also posting these episodes onto my website along with my own short fiction at joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW. Now, I wrote a story at the end of last year that is on my website called the Dead Science Fiction Writers Workshop, which I actually wrote at a science fiction writing workshop at Lumbank in Hebden Bridge. And this story is about a restructured Robert Heinlein AI teaching students about writing science fiction, but then it all gets a bit pervy. Because, hey, Robert Heinlein, he was a bit of a perv. Now, I read this as part of my ongoing Ray Bradbury challenge. I mentioned this in the last episode. This is where you read one short story, one poem, and one essay a day. Now, I put the word read in parentheses there because I actually am listening to these things because I'm severely visually impaired. Most of my reading is done either through podcasts or ebooks, and I'm hoping that by doing that, I'll become a better reader, a better writer. If you're enjoying these shows, please leave a review on iTunes or other podcast platform of your choice. And if you've got any suggestions for great short stories to listen to read, they don't have to be science fiction, let me know. You can email me, it's joncronshawauthor@gmail.com. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing By the Time We Get to Arizona by Madeline Ashby. The story is first published in the Hieroglyph Anthology from 2014. By the Time We Get to Arizona is a story about immigration, about borders. The setup is we have what is called a prototype community. This is a community that is under deep surveillance. almost like a Truman Show reality TV type of thing. It's a type of surveillance where every action is known, even down to data analysis of things like your toilet flushes, what you buy in shops. There's machines that can detect ambient hormone releases in the body, so it can tell whether you're lying. And just like a Reddit post or a YouTube video, you upvoted, there's likes and dislikes, you can vote on the people around you. And it's unclear which members of this community are able to vote. And the whole idea of voting is incentivized. In this place, people have to test out jobs for 6-week stints. In this story, it's a job involving lasers and science, complicated things that the average person probably wouldn't be able to do without necessary education. So with this idea of the surveillance, the invasiveness, the paranoia that this leads to, there's also a deep sense of environmental politics running through this. So there's a lot about corporations taking control over people's lives, a lot about how big data is used, how the deserts around the Mexican border should be used as a solar farm rather than a wasteland where people die trying to get into America. So along with this, along with the issues of immigration, surveillance, corporate control, corporate power, environmentalism, the main theme of this story, the main kind of inciting event of this story is about how pregnancy can literally ruin a woman's prospects. It seems that the rules of this community, if you're going to become an American citizen, you are precluded from this process if you're pregnant. The couple in this, we find out that the woman's pregnant. And because of the way things are being monitored, she's not allowed to lie. She can't lie. She's not allowed to be pregnant. There's strict controls over birth control on abortion rights. So they're essentially backed into a corner and have to make the trip through an illegal tunnel to get these drugs. So yeah, a lot going on in this story. It's well worth giving it a read. And even though I've picked out all these themes, all these ideas in the story, she doesn't hit you in the face with them. It's not like a fat dump or a expositional thing. It's all part of the story. It's all in the background. It's done a lot more subtly than I'm suggesting. So I think something like Margaret Atwood or Never Let Me Go by Kazuyo Ishiguro, we get this sense of this dystopian backdrop, this dystopian world, but it's never really explained fully why things are the way they are. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm posting these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW. I'm posting these episodes along with my own short fiction, plus my daily updates of the Bray Bradbury Challenge. The latest story I posted is a fantasy story about a female assassin called Basilisk on a Yellow Field. So please feel free to check that out, share that. That would be great. In other news, I've just completed the first draft to a post-apocalyptic novel, so I'll have more on that soon. If you're enjoying these shows, please do leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice. So leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. That'd be wonderful. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Billennium by J.G. Ballard. The story first appeared in Amazing Stories in 1962. I read this in the Oxford Book of Short SF Stories from 1992. Billennium is a story about overpopulation and the loss of rights and agency that this creates. Ballard outlines a frightening dystopian world where the human population has gone above 20 billion. Because of this overpopulation, people are forced to live in what he calls cubicles. These are essentially studio apartments that are around 4 by 4 square metres. And as more people are born, as the population expands, this amount of allotted room per person gets gradually smaller and smaller. As noted, along with the concerns about overpopulation, about the limited space to put people, we've also got this idea of surveillance, of the state having control over where people can go and where people can live. A week or two back, I read a very similar themed book, Make Room by Harry Harrison. This was another tale about overpopulation, about limited space, and I think these can quite easily be read together as almost as part of the same world. To get into spoiler territory now, the main catalyst of the story is the discovery by one of our main characters of a secret room next door to where he's living. This room's been forgotten, and it's much larger than his own. It's much larger than any he's ever lived in. There's room to move in a big wardrobe and chairs and furniture. But as the story progresses, he ends up moving people in. He moves in a friend and then a couple of women, and then they move in their aunts. And it ends up that even though he's got this bigger secret room, he's got no more space than he did before. And because this is Ballad, you know that this is a satire, that this is written with humour in mind as a deadpan commentary on the world around him. Have you read this story? What did you think? You can let me know by leaving a comment on my website. It's joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW. I'm also posting some of my own short stories on there, so you can check those out for free. If you haven't already, please do leave a review for this show on iTunes. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Like All Beautiful Places by Megan Arkenberg. The story was first published in The End Is Here, edited by John Joseph Adams as part of the Apocalypse Triptych. Like All Beautiful Places is set in San Francisco after the end of the world. The world has been destroyed by earthquakes and toxic rains, and most of the city has tumbled into a sinkhole. Our main character, Gracia, has a really strange relationship with the city. It's a city she hates. It's a city she has bad memories of, a place she doesn't like, but she's involved in this project with other survivors to reconstruct an immersive virtual reality construction of the city based on people's memories. Now, what I like about this story is the ambivalence towards the apocalypse that we get in this. On the one hand, we get the idea that, yes, the world has ended, that things are bad, but at the same time, for our main character, it's almost a cleansing thing, as a kind of rebirth of her life. She was involved in a very toxic relationship before the apocalypse, and her life seems to have been characterised by one mistake after another. Now, I think this idea of the city as memory is really interesting, and it kind of reminds me of people like Will Self, who pull on this idea of psychogeography, the idea that places can resonate meanings. And so when you've got these different memories from different people building up this virtual reality construct, you're inevitably going to get contradictions, inevitably going to get fogginess. And so as a thought piece, I think this is really interesting and kind of hints at some really quite clever ideas. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know on my website. It's joncronshaw.com. You can leave a comment there. It's JONCRONSHAW.com. On that site, you can check out some of my own short fiction. My latest story is called The Lady of the Mound, which is a very short story that draws on some creation myths, some ideas about magic, about the creation of the universe, and has its roots in things like Jewish mysticism and Welsh folklore. So if you're interested in that, please do check that out. Leave a comment on any of my stories as well. I'd love to hear your feedback. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Invasion of a Small Planet by Robert Reed. The story was first published in Asimov's magazine in June 2006. I listened to this on the Escape Pod podcast, episode 107. Invasion of a Small Planet is essentially a riff on Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey, and is told in a very strange, detached way. The story recounts the life of a doomed TV series, which is set in the future world of 2016. Don't know if you can imagine such a time. In this world, we have a startup company, a little bit like Netflix, distributes videos online, and it's bought this science fiction TV show. Now, when we get the descriptions of the TV show, it's a very boring show. There's a lot of hard science. And in the first episode, we discover that there's a alien artifact lodged into a meteorite that is the size of 2 grains of rice. After some examination, the device opens itself up to reveal a diamond, and that diamond starts to give out light, projecting images and alien words onto the wall. This TV series is so bad that it is cancelled after the 5th episode, but because of its really unusual take on science, it generates a fan base in the scientific community. When the series is re-released as a box set, we get to see why the series was cancelled, and it's because the 6th episode is a one-take journey through the solar system. And scientists believe that this is a really accurate rendering of what the solar system was like about 250 million years ago. So we pass Mars and it's wet, and then it comes down to Earth and we see proto-mammals, strange types of lizards, and so we get a glimpse into this world of the past. And the conclusion that many people start to draw about this film is that it is actually genuine, that it is the work of an alien. And then there's all this mystery going on with who actually made the film, how was the film produced. And so we're left at the end with a lot of unanswered questions. Now, when the researchers work out what is going on with this artefact, what it's trying to communicate, we find out that it is about the futility of trying to explore the stars, about the idea that space is empty, that even if we did travel to another solar system, our values and norms would be so different that it would be impossible and pointless to communicate. It would be futile. But of course, this raises a question. Maybe that's what the aliens want us to think. Have you read it? I really enjoyed this story. Thought it was a lot of fun. You can let me know what you think by visiting my website. It's joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW.com, where I'm posting all these episodes. Just find a link at the side that says Short Science Fiction Review. I'm also posting some of my own fiction on there as well, so you're more than welcome to check that out. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Communion by Mary Jane Mahanraj. The story was first published in June 2014 in Clarkesworld magazine. I listened to this on the Clarkesworld magazine podcast feed. I read this as part of my ongoing Ray Bradbury challenge. If you're not familiar with this, it is the idea that you read one short story, one poem and one essay every day for 1,000 days. I'm approaching day 50, so I've still got a ways to go before I reach the goal. Communion is essentially a story about the meeting of humans and aliens. When an alien is killed trying to save the lives of many humans and aliens, we have two very different beings from very different backgrounds sharing the grief and loss. Now, like all good alien stories, this one is about human values and about questioning our attitudes to the other. So in this story, we're led to empathise with both a human and an alien character, both of whom share very different values, very different ways of dealing with death, very different ways of dealing with grief. And even though these values and norms are almost diametrically opposed, we get this sense of how commonality, of how grief and a sharing of loss can actually bring strangers together. So I'm not going to spoil the way that this story goes, but it is very worth checking out. You can read it for free on the Clarkesworld website, so it's well worth doing, or as I say, it's on the podcast feed. So you can listen to Kate Baker's fantastic narration of the story. Have you read it? What did you think? Let me know on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I'm also posting these episodes onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Invasion of the Martians by Robert Coover. The story is first published in September 2016 in the New Yorker magazine. You can read this story online for free, so that's always good. Invasion of the Martians is a satire that follows the response to an alien invasion from an American senator. Now, the backdrop of this story is it is essentially a really bad B-movie kind of setup. We have our main character who's a senator, very promiscuous, he's handsome, he's a former astronaut, he's tipped to be a future president, but his life changes when Texas, his home state, is invaded by aliens. If you're looking for something with a similar tone, I would suggest something along the lines of Mars Attacks. But what this story does that is so clever is it shines a real stark light onto the state of American politics. And it's not too difficult to see echoes of Donald Trump in our main character. When the aliens first arrive, the senator's very welcoming and wants to welcome the aliens as new neighbours. But then something happens personally to him as a result of the aliens' actions that leads him on a path towards war. So we've essentially got the potential for annihilation, for destruction, as a result of one man's hurt ego. This senator's really gung-ho about nuking the aliens. Even against the best advice of scientists, there's a scientist who comes out and says that because of the molecular makeup of the aliens, nuclear weapons won't actually have any effect, and they'd be best using something like a herbicide to try and destroy them. Now, because there's a trend in politics, and this is in Britain and America, one only has to look at Michael Gove, trust your gut rather than the experts, was one of his lines. We have this dismissal of scientists, of experts, of people who actually know what they're on about in favour of rhetoric. And so instead of listening to the scientist's advice, this senator sends people to investigate the scientist, to try and dig dirt on him, to try and defame him, and to essentially ruin his career, accusing him of being unpatriotic because he doesn't support nuclear weapons being used against these aliens. It sounds ridiculous, it's satirical, it's farcical, but at the same time, it's so close to the truth, it's so close to the way that things actually are, that it's quite frightening. The story also highlights our attitudes towards immigration and the movement of people. There's a discussion about building a wall around America, essentially a force field to defend the country from alien invaders. However, this goes against the constitutional right of the freedom of movement, the freedom of Americans to go off into space and explore the galaxies however they see fit. So we see that inherent contradiction, that inherent tension that exists when one group is complaining about immigration, yet at the same time wanting freedom of movement for themselves. So I had a brief look online at some of the reviews of this, and it seemed to me a lot of people missed the point of this story. One person on Goodreads essentially asked why this author would submit such a puerile story to the New Yorker. How dare they? It's kind of a terrible career move. I disagree. I think this is a great work of satire that uses the tropes of 1950s science fiction to make a comment about the political culture in 2016. I do find it very sad that there are a lot of readers out there who dismiss anything that is funny or satirical or a bit off the wall as not being serious fiction. This is serious, this is cutting, and I highly recommend you read it. Have you read it? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter, it's at JL Cronshaw. I'll be posting this onto my website, which is joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW.com. So you're welcome to leave a comment there. I read this as part of my ongoing Ray Bradbury challenge, which is where I read one short story, one poem and one essay every single day for 1,000 days. I believe this is day 55. And again, I'm posting my progress on my website, so you're welcome to check that out. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Evil Robot Monkey by Mary Robinette Kowal. The story was first published in 2008. I read this in the Solaris Book of New Science Fiction, Volume 2, edited by George Mann. Evil Robot Monkey tells the story of a chimpanzee whose intelligence has been improved by the use of some kind of brain implant. The chimp, whose name is Sly, is essentially kept as an exhibit at a zoo, and it's a story that raises questions about intelligence and freedom, about isolation and creativity. Sly essentially exists in this limbo state. He's too intelligent to form a bond with the other chimps at the zoo, but at the same time he's too animal to form any relationships with humans. So what we see is this idea that although the animal is raised to human intelligence, the human element is missing. There's still a gap in the logical way of thinking or in the rationality that is associated with high-level human thought and is quite easily set into a rage. Now, because of the expectations of Sly's keepers, he gets punished every time he acts like a chimp. Every time Sly reverts to his true nature. And the way he's punished is to take away the one thing that Sly loves, which is his clay. It's a chimp that loves to sculpt. Now, what I really like about this story is that there's one character, one of the zookeepers, who gets Sly, who understands Sly. So in a world where this chimp is alienated, isolated, in this weird between state, there's still kindness, there's still hope. And for me, that's why it makes it a really appealing story. Have you read it? What did you think? Let me know on my website. It's joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW.com. I'm about to take part in NaNoWriMo, so I will be writing a novel throughout the month of November. I'll be posting updates on my website as well to do with that. It's a post-apocalyptic novel called Wizard of the Wasteland. It's outlined, it's plotted, it's ready to go. I'm very excited to write it. I've got a prequel written, which is with an editor. So as soon as that's ready to go, I'll set up a mailing list and way to get the books to anyone who's interested. So hopefully I'll have more on that soon. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing an advanced guide to successful price fixing in extraterrestrial betting markets by T.R. Napper. The story was originally published in Interzone magazine, issue 256 from January-February 2015. I listened to this on the latest episode of Starship Sofa from November 2016. This is a really interesting short story about a character who is obsessed with numbers. Our protagonist has high-functioning autism. He's able to hold down a relationship, but he has this obsession with numbers, with patterns, with prime numbers, that kind of thing. And after achieving vast things in the field of mathematics by the age of 23, he ends up turning his attention to gambling and becomes obsessed with horse racing and other betting markets. Now, because of our protagonist's condition, he tries to make every action he does part of a pattern. So, for example, when he walks on tiles, he'll go 3 squares forward and 1 across, a bit like the way a knight would move in chess. If he climbs upstairs, he has to miss a step each time he goes up, and he avoids standing on the cracks in pavements. And this story becomes a bit more interesting when we're introduced to an alien called Bruce. Now, we're not sure at the start whether this alien is real or not. We get a lot of questions raised about the idea of perception and reality, and about whether our senses can be trusted. It also asks, when faced with something very strange, very unusual, what the lines of rational thought are, whether rational thought can be made in the face of something that's just really out there and weird. Now, what we find out, and this is only a mild spoiler because it doesn't actually go into the main crux of the story, but we find out that human behaviour is the subject of alien betting markets. Because the human mind is so irrational, so random to these observers, these extraterrestrial beings are actually making bets on what courses of action people will take. Now, the Bruce character, the alien who comes to visit our protagonist, is essentially an alien mobster who's come to threaten our protagonist, warning him that he needs to stop being so patterned in his behaviour, to stop being so predictable, to do something random, because he's losing a lot of money on bets and he's blaming him for it. So the stakes are raised and actions have to be taken, and it all resolves itself in a really quite a fun way, quite a dark way, quite an interesting way. I really like this story. I think the writing tone of it is really interesting, really fun, and a little bit kind of off-kilter. And I suppose that reflects the mental state and the mindset of our protagonist. Have you read this story? What did you think? As I say, you can listen to this for free on the Starship Sofa podcast. If you've not listened to that podcast before, go and check it out. It is excellent. If you want to get in touch with me, you can leave a comment on my website. It's joncronshaw.com. I'll post this episode there. You can leave a comment there. You can also send me an email. It's joncronshaw, author@gmail.com. That's JONCRONSHAW, author@gmail.com. I'm currently in the middle of NaNoWriMo, so I am currently writing, what will probably end up being a 60,000 word novel called Wizard of the Wasteland. It's a post-apocalyptic novel focused on a travelling showman who uses old technology to create the illusion that he is a wizard, that he's a magician. So I'm having a lot of fun writing that at the moment, and I'm hoping that I'll get that out next year. I've also been posting some new fiction onto my website, again, joncronshaw.com. My latest story is called Mushrooms, which is about a guy who decides to move to Brooklyn in order to become Super Mario. It's a bit strange, it's a bit odd, somewhat surreal. So feel free to go check that out. Leave me a comment, leave me any feedback. I'd love to hear from you guys. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Today I'm going to be reviewing Of Sight, of Mind, of Heart by Samantha Murray. The story was first published in Clarksville magazine in November 2016. This is a story that pulls in a lot of ideas about things like child rearing, duty, about love, and it's a really emotionally charged tale about a woman who opts into a government programme to fight against alien invaders who have colonised Mars, and her role is essentially to give birth to a child that will be used as a soldier. Now, this child has accelerated growth, so by the time the child's about a year old, it's fully grown. It's a fully formed adult human, and at this point they're sent off to defend the human race. This is basically a fresh take on the old tale of a child leaving for war, but because of the acceleration, because of the short amount of time that you get to spend with your child, it has a real emotional impact, and it really crystallises this idea, really kind of puts this idea under the microscope. The idea that these people going to war are our children. And for that reason, the story is really affecting because we know that the child is essentially being sent on a suicide mission. Now, there's a lot of other themes running through this story. I mean, I've mentioned duty. There's this idea that you're willing to kind of put yourself through this emotional torment of having a child that you know you're not going to be able to have much time with, but that it is the only way to defeat these invaders. We also have the idea that child rearing, that maternal love, is an essential part of our humanity. We find out at one point in the story that experiments were done with children who've been given this accelerated growth and who were raised in a lab away from any parental influence. And they all ended up developing mental and emotional problems and were unsuitable for the task in hand. So yeah, great story, highly recommended. It's actually on the Clarkesworld magazine podcast, so you can listen to it for free. The narration's done by Kate Baker, who is an awesome narrator. So check that out, support Clarkesworld. Have you read this story? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I now have a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Jon Cronshaw author. That's JONCRONSHAW author. I've just reached the word count goal with my NaNoWriMo novel, Wizard of the Wasteland. Now, there's still a bit to go in terms of writing, but I've hit the 50,000 word mark, so I'm really pleased with that. I've just got the cover back from the designer as well, which looks awesome. So I'm hoping to have more news on that soon. So that's going to be really exciting. So until next time, cheerio. Hello and welcome to the Short Science Fiction Review with me, Jon Cronshaw. Before we get going, it's probably the last episode I'm going to do before the festive season, so I just want to wish you all a happy Christmas and a good new year. Hopefully 2017 will be better than 2016 has been for a lot of us. I do have some good news in that my novella, Addict of the Wasteland, is now available for free on my website, so you could go there. It's joncronshaw.com. That's JONCRONSHAW.com. You can click on the link there and it will show you how to download the novella for free. This is a prequel to my forthcoming novel, which is called Wizard of the Wasteland. I'm currently deep in the weeds of that at the moment, unpicking any editing issues that I have. So I'm hoping to get that out spring next year, spring 2017. So I will have more on that soon. So today I'm going to be reviewing Division by Zero by Ted Chiang. The story is first published in Full Spectrum 3 in 1991. I read this in Ted Chiang's short story collection, The Story of Your Life and Others. This is a story about a husband and wife, and it's told from both of their perspectives. The wife, called Renee, is a brilliant mathematician who discovers that the principles underpinning arithmetic are flawed. At the beginning of the story, we find out that Renee is in hospital after a suicide attempt, and so for the rest of the story we find out why this happened, what led to it. We also find out the husband's response to this. The husband, called Carl, who 20 years earlier had his own attempt at suicide. And because he came through it, he promised himself he would be one of those people who'd be there for anyone in need, that he would support his wife, that he would empathise, that he would be there in the worst moments. And so this story is essentially about two worldviews, two firmly held beliefs being shattered. On the one hand, we've got Carl's worldview, this idea that he is this empathetic guy. And on the other hand, we've got this brilliant mathematician discovering that her assumptions about the world are flawed, that everything underpinning the universe, her construction of reality, is merely a human construction. And so by the end of this story, we're led to this weird kind of tension, this contradictory point where an important revelation that is necessary for understanding is also the one that unravels the possibility of understanding. Because this is Ted Chiang, this is high concept stuff, it's really beautifully written and it pushes these ideas against each other in a really satisfying way. The story raises the question of what would happen if you discovered a truth that destroyed everything you held dear about yourself and about the world. So with Renee's story, we find someone who is obsessed with mathematics, who sees mathematical patterns in everything, but who also proves that this obsession, this love, is built on shaky foundations. This is a great story. I would highly recommend that you go out of your way to read it. Have you read it? What did you think? Let me know. I'm on Twitter. It's at JL Cronshaw. I also have a Facebook page now, which is facebook.com/Jon Cronshaw.